That was Eternal Father, Strong to Save, performed by the Armed Forces Chorus, the U.S. Marine Orchestra, and the Cathedral Chorus. You're listening to live coverage of the funeral of the 39th President of the United States, Jimmy Carter, from the Washington National Cathedral on 89.7 GBH. So far, we've heard from a grandson of Jimmy Carter, the sons of Vice President Mondale and President Ford. And who else, Marjorie, as another speaker approaches the podium?
We're going to hear from Stuart Eisenstadt, who is a former Carter advisor, and we're also going to hear from the son of Jimmy Carter as well. I'm not sure who this gentleman is that's approaching the podium right
grandson,
now.
I think, another grandson of Jimmy Carter. Is that not right? Coming up?
I believe it's his son.
Is it a son? I'm
sorry.
But
this is, I believe, Stuart Eisenstadt, who is a former Carter advisor, that apparently had a work ethic matching Carter.
Here he is. Close to being a Renaissance man as any president entering the Oval Office in modern times. He was skilled in an astonishing array of activities: farmer, businessman, nuclear engineer, naval submarine officer, woodworker, painter, fly fisherman, music lover, poet, author, Sunday school teacher, creator of the Carter Center, and yes, loving husband, father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, and Nobel Peace Prize winner. Behind that toothy smile was a man of steel determination, discipline, and self-confidence. In 1974, when he was governor of Georgia, I suggested that if he ran for president and won a few Southern primaries, he might get lucky and be the vice presidential nominee for regional balance. With his broadest grin, he said, "Stu, I've already decided to run, but I will be the Democratic nominee for president, not vice president." For one of our nation's most religious presidents, it's appropriate to celebrate Jimmy Carter's remarkable life in this magnificent cathedral. His religious values gave him an unshakable sense of right and wrong, animating his support for civil rights at home and human rights abroad, and propelling him to major achievements as the only Democratic president elected between 1968 and 1992. His faith brought integrity to the presidency after the Watergate and Vietnam eras. "I'll never lie to you," he promised. It was a vow he fulfilled. But his faith respected other religions as well. He was the first president to light a Hanukkah menorah. He created the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, which I have the honor of chairing. He had a kosher Shabbat dinner at Camp David for the Israeli delegation and came to our house for a Passover Seder, only weeks after he negotiated the treaty between Israel and Egypt. As we lay our 39th president to rest, it's time to redeem his presidency and also lay to rest the myth that his greatest achievements came only as a former president. The test of American presidents is not the number of years they serve, but the duration of their accomplishments. By this measure, Jimmy Carter was among the most consequential one-term presidents in American history. His intellect, prodigious work habits, discipline, and mastery of details were crucial to his success at home and abroad. President Carter parked politics at the Oval Office door to do what he believed was the right thing, taking controversial challenges on, regardless of the political consequences, and frankly, there were many. Much of his agenda passed with bipartisan support, a quaint notion in today's hyper-polarized politics. Independent surveys indicated he had one of the highest success rates in passing his major legislation of any American president. And he was remarkably accessible to the press and to the American people. This president from the deepest part of the Deep South championed civil rights, appointing more people of color and women to senior executive positions and judgeships than all previous 38 presidents before him. He created the Department of Education and dramatically increased funding for low and moderate income students. And we can thank him for all the ethics in government laws, comprehensive civil service reform, the creation of FEMA to coordinate natural disaster relief and rebuilding that remain crucially important today, and we see it in Los Angeles. Jimmy Carter was also the greatest environmental president since Theodore Roosevelt, adding 80 million acres in Alaska to the national park system. And his Global 2000 report forecasts climate change. His energy bills were critical to move our country from dependence on foreign oil to energy security. We are now, as a result, the largest oil and gas producer in the world. He provided the first incentives for conservation and inaugurated the era of clean energy and symbolized it with solar panels he installed on the White House roof. Underappreciated at the time, but now widely recognized by Republicans and Democrats alike, President Carter was the great deregulator, winning legislative battles to loosen the regulatory bonds and shackles on airlines, thereby democratizing air travel, on trucking and rails, therefore helping our supply chains be more efficient, telecommunications leading to the cable TV era, and even the beer industry, which encouraged local craft beers. And he did so without compromising health and safety. These laid the foundations for today's innovative economy. Nothing better embodies President Carter than how he dealt with the inflation that beleaguered the nation under 3 presidents, 2 Republican, Nixon and Ford, and himself during the 1970s. Over the objection of all of his advisors, he chose Paul Volcker to lead the Federal Reserve, knowing in advance that Volcker's tough monetary policy would raise interest rates and unemployment because Paul told him that, and would do so in a presidential election year. You take care of the economy, Paul. I'll take care of the politics. Inflation indeed dropped like a rock after he left office and remained low for decades. Abroad, Jimmy Carter laid the building blocks for a better world. He was the first president to make human rights a priority for U.S. foreign policy. And this led directly to the release of thousands of political prisoners in Latin America and stimulated them to a lasting democratic transition. He ushered in a new era of hemispheric relations with the Panama Canal treaties, the toughest legislative battle of his presidency. He uniquely combined the soft power of human rights, championing freedom for the communist East Bloc countries and tripling the emigration of Soviet Jews. He combined that with hard power, rebuilding America's military strength after its post-Watergate decline. He negotiated a major nuclear arms treaty with the Soviets, while at the same time initiated every single weapons system that came online in the 1980s. Those new weapons helped end the Cold War. He normalized relations with China, and even his critics applauded his tough measures after the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. Jimmy Carter's most lasting achievement, and the one I think he was most proud of, was to bring the first peace to the Middle East through the greatest act of personal diplomacy in American history, the Camp David Accords. For 13 days and nights, he negotiated with Israel's Menachem Begin and Egypt's Anwar Sadat, personally drafting more than 20 peace proposals and shuttling them between the Israeli and Egyptian delegations. And he saved the agreement at the 11th hour, and it was the 11th hour, by appealing to Begin's love of his grandchildren. For the past 45 years, the Egypt-Israel peace treaty has never been violated and laid the foundation for the Abraham Accord. On the other side of the ledger was Iran. Jimmy Carter did not lose Iran, the Shah did. But the hostage crisis was a major factor in denying him a second term, despite his support for the Shah, because he placed the safe return of the hostages above his own political fortunes. He took full responsibility for the failure of the bold hostage rescue mission and worked tirelessly even after his bitter re-election defeat to Ronald Reagan, securing their release on the last day of his presidency. In the end, Jimmy Carter taught all of us how to live a life fulfilled with faith and service. He said, "I have one life to live. I feel like God wants me to do the best I can do with it, to let me live my life so that it will be meaningful." Well, Mr. President, you've more than achieved that goal. He may not be a candidate for Mount Rushmore, but he belongs in the foothills of making the U.S. stronger and the world safer. Jimmy Carter has earned his place in heaven, but just as he was free with sometimes unsolicited advice for his presidential successors, the Lord of all creation should be ready for Jimmy's recommendations on how to make God's realm a more peaceful place.
That was Stuart Eisenstadt, who is a key domestic advisor at the White House to Jimmy Carter. In a couple of seconds, we will hear, I don't know if it's the next thing on the agenda, but performance of a song that apparently was one of Jimmy Carter's favorites, Imagine, John Lennon's Imagine, by Garth Brooks and Trisha Yearwood. I believe there's another grandson who will speak, and Joe Biden, President Biden, who is sitting among presidents, former presidents, Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump, will give remarks in a few minutes too. You're listening to 89.7 GBH. We're broadcasting live coverage of the state funeral of Jimmy Carter at the Washington National Cathedral. We're waiting to see who is the next person to approach the podium. You know, one of the things that stuck with us, which a lot of people are talking about, is that before the thing started, who was talking Barack Obama's ear off nonstop for minutes and minutes?
Trump.
They're sitting
Obama
next to
was
each other.
laughing and smiling, and Trump is whispering in Obama's ear. So it was interesting. Michelle Obama is the only first lady not there. She's apparently stayed in Hawaii.
Yeah. This is Jason Carter, who is yet another grandson of Jimmy Carter.
In my church, we sing a song that says, "From the moment that I wake up until I lay my head, I will sing of the goodness of God." I don't know how many people in here can say that. I know I can't. But my grandfather certainly can. From the moment that he woke up until he laid his head, his life was a testament to the goodness of God. And I thank all of you for being here to celebrate this life. To the presidents and first ladies, it is a great honor to have you here. You know the human side of the American presidency like no others, and we appreciate you. To the vice presidents, other distinguished guests, and friends of all kinds, thank you for being here. To those of you who came from all across the world, thank you for being here to celebrate and pay tribute to my grandfather. I say grandfather, but we called him Papa, as many of you know. We called my grandmother Mom Carter, so we spent our time talking about Mom and Papa, and mostly, speaking of the human side of the presidency, just letting people know that they were regular folks. Yes, they spent 4 years in the governor's mansion and 4 years at the White House, but the other 92 years they spent at home in Plains, Georgia. And one of the best ways to demonstrate that they were regular folks is to take them by that home. First of all, it looks like they might have built it themselves. Second of all, my grandfather was likely to show up at the door in some 70s short shorts and Crocs. And then you'd walk in the house and it was like thousands of other grandparents' house all across the South. Fishing trophies on the walls. The refrigerator, of course, was papered with pictures of grandchildren and then great-grandchildren. Their main phone, of course, had a cord and was stuck to the wall in the kitchen, like a museum piece. And demonstrating their Depression-era roots, they had a little rack next to the sink where they would hang Ziploc bags to dry. And demonstrating that they changed with the times, eventually he did get a cell phone, and one time he called me sort of early on in that process. And on my phone it said, Papa Mobile. So I answered it, of course. I said, hey, Papa. He said, who's this? I said, this is Jason. He said, what are you doing? I said, I'm not doing anything. You called me. He said, I didn't call you. I'm taking a picture. It was a nuclear engineer, right? I mean, they were small town people who never forgot who they were and where they were from, no matter what happened in their lives. But I recognize that we are not here because he was just a regular guy. As you've heard from the other speakers, his political life and his presidency for me was not just ahead of its time, it was prophetic. He had the courage and strength to stick to his principles even when they were politically unpopular. As governor of Georgia half a century ago, he preached an end to racial discrimination and an end to mass incarceration. As president in the 1970s, as you've heard, he protected more land than any other president in history. 50 years ago, he was a climate warrior who pushed for a world where we conserved energy, limited emissions, and traded our reliance on fossil fuels for expanded renewable sources. By the way, he cut the deficit, wanted to decriminalize marijuana, deregulated so many industries that he gave us cheap flights and, as you heard, craft beer. Basically, all of those years ago, he was the first millennial. And he could make great playlists, as we've heard as well. Maybe this is unbelievable to you, but in my 49 years, I never perceived a difference between his public face and his private one. He was the same person no matter who he was with or where he was. And for me, that's the definition of integrity. That honesty was matched by love, it was matched by faith. And in both public and private, my grandparents did fundamentally live their lives in an effort, as the Bible says, to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with their God. Sometimes I feel and felt like I shared my grandfather with the world. Today is one of those days. But really, he shared the world with me. The power of an atom, the beauty and complexity of a South Georgia forest. When we fished, he celebrated the majesty of everything from the smallest minnow to that grand circulation of waters. And he shared this love with my boys, taking these Atlanta public school kids out into the fields to show them about row crops and wild plums. In the end, his life is a love story. And of course, it's a love story about Jimmy and Rosalind and their 77 years of marriage and service. As the song says, they were the flagship of the fleet. And rest assured that in these last weeks, he told us that he was ready to see her again. But his life was also a broader love story, about love for his fellow humans and about living out the commandment to love your neighbor as yourself. I believe that that love is what taught him and told him to preach the power of human rights, not just for some people, but for all people. It focused him on the power and the promise of democracy, its love for freedom, its requirement and founding belief in the wisdom of regular people raising their voices, and the requirement that you respect all of those voices, not just some. That conviction made him a naval officer who believed and demonstrated, as you've heard, that the greatest power of America was not the military, but its values. And those values were personal to him, and he lived them both publicly and privately. As you heard Stu say, as president, he gave voice to dissidents, stood up to dictators, brought countries together in peace. His heart broke for the people of Israel. It broke for the people of Palestine, and he spent his life trying to bring peace to that holy land. And he talked about it at the dinner table. It was the same in public as it was in private. And for the last 40 years, as you've heard, he spent his time living out that love and that faith alongside the poorest and most marginalized people in the world. And that work, again, has been based fundamentally on love and respect. The Carter Center has 3,500 employees, but only a couple hundred in the United States. The rest are spread throughout the countries where we work: Ethiopia, South Sudan, Chad, Bangladesh, and all of the Carter Center's programs are based on a respect, that same respect for the power of regular people, even if they are in tiny villages miles from anywhere else. To give one example, we've all heard a lot lately about guinea worm disease. It's an ancient and debilitating disease of poverty, and that disease will have existed from the dawn of humanity until Jimmy Carter. When he started working on this disease, there were 3.5 million cases in humans every year. Last year, there were 14. And the thing that's remarkable is that this disease is not eliminated with medicine. It's eliminated essentially by neighbors talking to neighbors about how to collect water in the poorest and most marginalized villages in the world. And those neighbors truly were my grandfather's partners for the last 40 years. And as this disease has been eliminated in every village in Nigeria, every village in Sudan or Uganda, what's left behind in those tiny 600-person villages is an army of Jimmy and Rosalind Carters who have demonstrated their own power to change their world. And that is a fundamental truth about my grandfather. It begins where it ends. When he saw a tiny 600-person village that everybody else thinks of as poor, he recognized it. That's where he was from. That's who he was. And he never saw it as a place to send pity. It was always a place to find partnership and power, and a place to carry out that commandment to love your neighbor as yourself. Essentially, he eradicated a disease with love and respect. He waged peace with love and respect. He led this nation with love and respect. To me, this life was a love story from the moment that he woke up until he laid his head. Conclude with this. As Andy Young told me, he may be gone, but he's not gone far. The outpouring of love and support that we have felt from you and from around the world shows how many lives he has touched and how his spirit will live on in many ways for us. He'll be in the kitchen making pancakes, or in his wood shop finishing a cradle for a great-grandchild, standing in a trout stream with Mom Carter, or for me, just walking those Georgia fields and forests where he's from. Thank you.
You just heard Jason Carter, who is one of Jimmy Carter's grandsons. I thought he was terrific, by the way. He was really something.
He was terrific. And you know, almost every speaker has talked about his environment. He was way ahead on the environment with the solar panels on the roof. And his grandson just talked about the values of America and the love of respect with which he led the nation, which was, he also made a joke about how he was like the first millennial.
I know, it was a great line,
into
actually.
decriminalizing
That's
marijuana, into craft beer, and that was a pretty good line, too. And he also, of course, mentioned the Camp David Accords.
So we know at least, you're listening to 89.7 GBH. I'm Jim Browder, she's Marjorie Egan. We know Garth Brooks and Trisha Yearwood will sing John Lennon's Imagine, one of Jimmy Carter's favorite songs. President Biden will speak. And I guess here they are right now.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found.
Even I know that was not Garth Brooks singing Imagine. That was Phyllis Adams, soprano, singing Amazing Grace with the U.S. Marine Chamber Orchestra. And apparently coming up is the President of the United States. See if I get this right. Yes, this is Joe Biden approaching the podium, and we'll bring him live at 89.7 GBH. Touches the casket of the 39th president and is on his way to the podium. The only, all the living presidents are there. Michelle Obama's not there, apparently held up in Hawaii. Here's President Joe Biden.
Leaders of the clergy, distinguished guests, most importantly, the Carter family. In April 2021, Jill and I visited Jimmy and Rosalind on a warm spring day down in Plains, Georgia. We wanted to see them. Rosalind met us at the front door with her signature smile. Together, we entered a home that they had shared for almost 77 years of marriage. An unassuming red brick ranch home that reflects their modesty more than any trappings of power. We walked into the living room where Jimmy greeted us like family. That day, just the four of us sat in the living room and shared memories that spanned almost 6 decades. A deep friendship that started in 1974. I was a 31-year-old senator, and I was the first senator outside of Georgia, maybe the first senator, to endorse his candidacy for president. It was an endorsement based on what I believe is Jimmy Carter's enduring attribute: character, character, character. Because of that character, I believe, is destiny. Destiny in our lives, and quite frankly, destiny in the life of the nation. It's an accumulation of a million things built on character that leads to a good life in a decent country. Life of purpose, life of meaning. Now, how do we find that good life? What does it look like? What does it take to build character? Do the ends justify the means? Jimmy Carter's friendship taught me, and through his life taught me, the strength of character is more than title or the power we hold. It's the strength to understand that everyone should be treated with dignity, respect, that everyone, and I mean everyone, deserves an even shot. Not a guarantee, but just a shot. You know, we have an obligation to give hate no safe harbor, and to stand up to what my dad used to say is the greatest sin of all, the abuse of power. That's not about being perfect, because none of us are perfect. We're all fallible. But it's about asking ourselves, are we striving to do things, the right things? What values? What are the values that animate our spirit? Do we operate from fear or hope, ego or generosity? Do we show grace? Do we keep the faith when it's most tested? For keeping the faith with the best of humankind and the best of America is a story, in my view, from my perspective, Jimmy Carter's life. A story of a man, to state the obvious, you've heard today some great, great eulogies, who came from a house without running water or electricity and rose to the pinnacle of power. The story of a man who was at once driven and devoted to making real the words of his Savior and the ideals of this nation. The story of a man who never let the tides of politics divert him from his mission to serve and shape the world. The man had character. Jimmy held a deep Christian faith in God, and that his candidacy spoke and wrote about. Faith as a substance of things hoped for and evidence of the things not seen. Faith founded on commandments of Scripture. Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and all thy mind and all thy soul, and love thy neighbor as thyself. Easy to say, but very, very difficult to do. In his life, in this life, any walk of faith can be difficult. It can be lonely, but it requires action to be the doers of the world. But in that commandment lies the essence, in my view, found in the gospel, found in many faith traditions, and found in the very idea of America. Because the very journey of our nation is a walk of sheer faith. To do the work, to be the country we say we are, to be the country we say we want to be, a nation where all are created equal in the image of God and deserve to be treated equally throughout our lives. We've never fully lived up to that idea of America. We've never walked away from it either because of patriots like Jimmy Carter. Throughout his life, he showed us what it means to be a practitioner of good works and a good and faithful servant of God and of the people. And today, many think he was from a bygone era. But in reality, he saw well into the future. A white Southern Baptist who led on civil rights. A decorated Navy veteran who brokered peace. A brilliant nuclear engineer who led on nuclear nonproliferation. A hardworking farmer who championed conservation and clean energy. And a president who redefined the relationship with a vice president. Jimmy and I often talked about our dear friend Walter Mondale, whom we all miss very much. Together, they formed a model partnership of collaboration and trust, because both were men of character. And as we all know, Jimmy Carter also established a model post-presidency by making a powerful difference as a private citizen in America, and, I might add, as you all know, around the world. Through it all, he showed us how character and faith start with ourselves and then flows to others. At our best, we share the better parts of ourselves: joy, solidarity, love, commitment. Not for reward, but in reverence for the incredible gift of life we've all been granted. To make every minute of our time here on earth count. That's the definition of a good life. A life Jimmy Carter lived during his 100 years. To young people, to anyone in search of meaning and purpose, study the power of Jimmy Carter's example. I miss him, but I take solace in knowing that he and his beloved Rosalind are reunited again. And to the entire Carter family, thank you, and I mean this sincerely, for sharing them both with America and the world. We love you all, Jill and I will cherish our visits with them, including that last one in their home. We saw Jimmy as he always was, at peace, with a life fully lived, a good life, a purpose and meaning, of character, driven by destiny, and filled with the power of faith, hope, and love. I'll say it again, faith, hope, and love. As he returned to Plains, Georgia, for his final resting place, we can say goodbye in the words of the prophet Micah, who Jimmy so admired until his final breath. Jimmy Carter did justly, loved mercy, walked humbly. May God bless a great American, a dear friend, and a good man. May he be raised up on eagle's wings and bear you on the breath of dawn and make you to shine like the sun and hold you in the palm of his hand. God bless you, Jimmy Carter.
And Joe, you just heard President Joe Biden. We are broadcasting live the state funeral of Jimmy Carter at the Washington National Cathedral. Without fear of making yet another mistake, I believe all that is left of this service is Garth Brooks and Trisha Yearwood singing one of Jimmy Carter's favorite songs, and probably yours, John Lennon's Imagine. We'll see in a second. We expect to be joined by Chuck Todd immediately after this service to talk briefly about what happened at the funeral and whatever else we have time for. I thought the Biden speech was pretty interesting, particularly the first half, Marjorie.
Well, it was mostly talking about virtues, humility, standing up against the abuse of power, giving hate no safe harbor. It seemed to be
Directed at somebody
contrasting,
sitting in the second row.
Jimmy Carter with someone else.
Well,
And-
wrong again, Jim Browdy. There is another speaker. We're not quite sure who he is yet, who is approaching the podium.
Did you know that Jimmy Carter did a duet of "On the Road Again" with Willie Nelson?
In fact, I did.
I did not know
yeah.
that until today.
And I've heard for about the 14th day today there would not be craft beer were it not for Jimmy Carter, which apparently is true because of his legalizing, I guess, home brewing. We'll let you know who's about to speak in a couple of seconds.
Yeah, he was not listed on the
here,
original program.
apparently. James Carter IV is about to, another grandson, about to take the podium. Here he is.
A reading from the Gospel according to St. Matthew. Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything, except to be thrown out and trampled by men. You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before men, that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. The word of the Lord.
That was James Carter IV, yet another grandson of President Carter.
Reciting the Sermon on the Mount or the Beatitudes.
Thank you for that, Marjorie.
This is
Doing
a
that
very
for me, I assume?
faith-based day, and that was Christ's first speech.
Was. Thank you. Again, we believe that the performance of Imagine by Garth Brooks and Trisha Yearwood will conclude the service, but I've said that several times, have I not? And been wrong. We shall see. We're broadcasting live the state funeral of Jimmy Carter, obviously at the Washington National Cathedral. It is nearing its end. We hope to speak to Chuck Todd for a couple of minutes before the noon news. We shall see soon. What have you thought of this? Oh, actually, here is
Andrew Leung.
Andrea Leung,
Yep.
who opened this thing, former ambassador to the UN for President Carter, and he's taking a seat. He is, I believe, did I say before, 91 or 92? And it appears he is about to speak as well. Andrea Leung.
The Apostle Paul, in writing to the Ephesians, the 4th chapter, the 32nd verse, be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. Jimmy Carter, for me, was something of a miracle. I was born in the Deep South shortly, a few years after him, and it was always a place of miracles. I couldn't see how we could have had the differences in background, the coming from different places on the planet, the experiences of slave and slave owner, the diversity of color and creed and national origin, and still become the great nation that we are in the United States of America. It was something of a miracle. And I don't mean this with any disrespect, but it's still hard for me to understand how you could get to be president from Plains, Georgia. I knew Plains from my pastorate in Thomasville, Georgia, about 60, 70 miles south of there. And I was even nervous driving through Plains. And Plains and Sumter County gave us one of the meanest experiences that we had in the civil rights movement. So much so that Martin Luther King said that the sheriff of Plains, of Sumter County, he really thought was the meanest man in the world. And when I first met Jimmy Carter running for governor, and said, the only thing I know about Plains and Sumter County is Fred Chappell. And he said, oh yes, he's one of my good friends. And that was the last thing I wanted to hear. And yet time and time again, I saw in him the ability to achieve greatness by the diversity of his personality and his upbringing. Dr. King used to say that greatness is characterized by antitheses strongly marked. You've got to have a tough mind and a tender heart. And that was Jimmy Carter. And he grew up in the tremendous diversity of the South, and he embraced both sides. He was a minority in Sumter County. Just about 25% of the population was white. But growing up as a minority, he became the friend of the majority. And when he went to the Naval Academy, he asked that his roommate be the first black midshipman to come to Annapolis. And he said, I know minorities. I've been a minority most of my life, and maybe I can help him in his adjustments. And he went out of his way to embrace those of us who had grown up in all kinds of conflict. But that was the sensitivity, the spirituality that made James Earl Carter a truly great president. James Earl Carter was truly a child of God, not only a good farmer, but a nuclear physicist chosen by Admiral Rickover to assist him in developing a nuclear navy. But at the same time he was working on a nuclear navy, he was thinking of peace on earth and goodwill toward all men, and especially women and children. I've known President Carter for more than half of my life, and I never cease to be surprised. I never cease to be enlightened. I never cease to be inspired by the little deeds of love and mercy that he shared with us every day of his life. It was President James Earl Carter that for me symbolized the greatness of the United States of America. And I am truly grateful for him, because in spite of the harshness of the Depression and the explosions of inflation, he never wavered from his commitment to God Almighty and his love of all of God's children. Jimmy Carter was a blessing that helped to create a great United States of America. And for all of us, and many who are not able to be here, I want to say thank you. You have been a blessing from God, and your spirit will remain with us. And as Jason said, he may be gone, but he ain't gone far. Thank you, President Carter, and thank you, Almighty God.
That was pretty beautiful. That was the Reverend Andrew Leung, 92 years old, former ambassador to the UN, making the case, as Stuart Eisenstadt did, that he wasn't just a great former ex-president, but was a great president as well.
And he also, obviously, Andrew Leung, great civil rights leader, talked about the impact of Jimmy Carter's, again, prescience on civil rights.
Do you know the story about the midshipman, the black midshipman,
I read it
the first?
this week. Yeah, he wanted, as Andrew Leung said, Carter wanted that black midshipman to be his roommate.
Now, I've told you about 15 times that Garth Brooks and Trisha Yearwood were going to sing
think
John
we
Lennon's
see them
Imagine,
now,
one of
yes.
Jimmy Carter's favorite. Garth Brooks is about to plug in his guitar. Standing a few feet away is Trisha Yearwood, and they will sing Imagine by John Lennon, which again, reportedly was one of Jimmy Carter's favorite songs. Here they are from the Washington National Cathedral. You're listening to the state funeral for Jimmy Carter. Here they are.
Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us. Above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Imagine there's no country. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for. No religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us and the world will be as one. Imagine no possession. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger. A brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us and the world will live as one.
That was Garth Brooks and Trisha Yearwood singing Imagine It. It was pretty great watching at least one president, Joe Biden, mouthing the words
Yep,
along to
singing along.
John. What did you say when I said how beautiful this
Well,
was while he's singing it?
I said that this funeral was a pretty good day for Jesus Christ,
It
who seemed
was.
to be the star of this, talking endlessly about Carter's faith. But of course, imagine is imagining no heaven, imagine there's no religion at all. I think a lot of people there today were hoping that Jimmy Carter was already in heaven, so that was sort of an interesting song. But it's a great song. He's obviously talking about people sharing the wealth of the world and living to be good to their fellow man. So that's, I'm sure, why they chose that song.
So there's just some niceties to end this thing now. All the people at the cathedral have risen, but you've listened to roughly 2 hours of the funeral of the 39th president sitting in the front rows. Every living president, I believe, the only sort of missing companions, Michelle Obama is in Hawaii and couldn't get back. Dick Cheney is not there, even though his president was. And interestingly, Vice President-elect Vance is not
Yeah,
there.
we didn't see him.
Even though
No explanation for why he's
President
not there.
Trump is there along with Melania Trump. So what was your major takeaway from this?
You know, I thought it was a beautiful tribute to Jimmy Carter. I mentioned at the beginning that before the funeral started, Barack Obama is sitting next to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is talking in his ear and talking in his ear and talking in his ear, and Obama's laughing,
No,
and
they
they're
were
having a
palling it up.
pretty great time. But overall, I think what they did was they talked about Jimmy Carter's prescience on a lot of things, income inequality. His grandson Joshua Carter talked about that. Almost everybody talked about his being ahead of the game on climate change, solar solar panels on the roof of the White House, which of course Ronald Reagan took off. I thought there was a great line from Eisenstadt when he talked about Jimmy Carter may not have made it to Mount Rushmore, but he should have made it to the foothills of Mount
pretty great.
Rushmore. And then
His speech was all, as we said a minute ago, was to say that, the conventional wisdom in this country is that he was the best former president,
Right.
but he was actually a great president as well. By the way, the Washington Post is saying somewhere at the service, he was not in the front few rows, was Vice President-elect Vance.
Yeah, and Eisenstadt did go right through the achievements of his presidency. And of course, there were the Camp David Accords, bringing Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin together. The Egyptian president who was later assassinated, of course, and Menachem Begin from Israel. That was a great achievement too. And then Biden's speech was a lot about the contrast of the goodness and the faith life of love and respect and dignity. He talked a lot about that. You wondered if it was a little dig at Trump, I don't know, but Carter talked about things like building character. Everyone should be treated with dignity and respect. Give hate no safe harbor. Stand up to the abuse of power. Is it about ego or generosity? Do you show grace? And you couldn't help thinking that that was a...
Do you think we're reading too much into that? I do not.
I don't, but I could be wrong. And then we had the grandson giving the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount, so-called, about,
Carter the Fourth.
which is basically about things that you think are horrible: being poor, being mourning, being in mourning, having no money, and how those things are blessings in some sense, turning that all on its head. And then we had Andrew Young talking about, he, of course, was the UN ambassador, and he grew up in the segregationist South, and talking about Jimmy Carter way back when he was at Annapolis, wanting to have the first black
That's incredible.
midshipman as his roommate, because he thought, having grown up in Plains, he had a kindred spirit with a lot of young African Americans.
So that was the funeral. You heard it live here on 89.7 GBH. It's drawing to a close as we speak. In a couple of minutes, after Henry Santoro brings us the news, we'll be joined by Andrea Cabral to talk about current events. Paul Reville, former Secretary of Education, will be joining us. Who's joining us at 1 o'clock again? Who are we talking to at 1 o'clock?
Shirley Leung.
Oh, Shirley Leung is
Yep.
joining us. And then I'm not even going to tell you what we're doing at the end of the show because it's too embarrassing after following something as significant as the funeral of the 39th President of the United States. So here he is, Henry Santoro with the news, and then we shall return.
Thank you, Jim. Good afternoon from the GBH Radio Newsroom in Boston. I'm Henry Santoro, a beautiful tribute to the late Jimmy Carter. Emerson College President Jay Bernhardt has arrived in Los Angeles to meet with students, faculty, and others in the Emerson LA community. He sent a letter saying that with the exception of smoke and wind, the Emerson LA campus remains safe from the wildfires. And he anticipates that undergrad students that are out there can move in as scheduled on Saturday, January 18th. Adds that updates will be made when necessary and that the Emerson Wellness Center in LA is available to anyone in the college's community. Again, Emerson College president in LA, just keeping everybody apprised of the wildfires as far as Emerson is concerned. The new training ship at the Mass Maritime Academy departs Saturday on its first ever sea term. The ship, called Patriot State, was built specifically for training. The previous vessel, the Kennedy, was a converted cargo ship. Unlike the old, the new vessel can be navigated from either the main bridge or the training bridge, says training ship commander Andrew Fusco, a senior from Rentham.
This is our training bridge, so this is pretty much the same exact layout as the regular bridge, but it's going to be used for simulation type purposes when we're underway. We do have the capability, if something went wrong on the actual bridge, we can turn over control and we can run everything from the training bridge, which is really cool.
The 6-week voyage will make stops in San Juan, Puerto Rico, St. Thomas, Tampa, Florida, and Charleston, South Carolina. The public is welcome to see the ship off on Saturday at slack tide just before 7 a.m. Sports, the Bruins in Tampa Bay tonight. The Celtics host Sacramento tomorrow night at the Garden. In the Australian Open, the first tennis major of the new season, kicks off on Saturday from Melbourne. And just an FYI, it's 85 degrees in Melbourne, Australia today. In the forecast here today, clouds with light flurries today, high near 30, cloudy mid-20s tomorrow, sunny upper 30s on Saturday, and then flurries on late Saturday into Sunday. This is GBH News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Indeed, designed to be an end-to-end hiring solution for businesses of all sizes to attract, interview, and hire candidates, all from one platform. Learn more at Indeed.com/NPR.
You're listening to 89.7 WGBH, HD1 Boston, online at gbhnews.org. GBH News, what matters to you?
Welcome back to hour number 2 of Boston Public Radio. Jim Brady and Marjorie Egan. We are streaming live from the GBH studio in Brighton at youtube.com/GBH News. We're going to be back at the Boston Public Library tomorrow with great Celtic musician Lindsay O'Donovan, who, of course, was a long time married to our great colleague Brian O'Donovan, the late Brian O'Donovan. She'll be with us for Live Music Friday, as well as media maven Sue O'Connell, and former Governor Deval Patrick is going to zoom in to talk about the Embrace honors for Martin Luther King. Okay, here now in Zoom is former Suffolk County Sheriff and former Massachusetts Secretary of Public Safety, Andrea Cabral.
I'm fine, thank you. How are you, Andrea? Nice to see you.
I'm well. How are you both?
We're excellent.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't say hello there, Jim. Anyway, Andrea, we are talking today about Jimmy Carter and Jimmy Carter's funeral and being put to rest. Could a truth-telling person like Jimmy Carter survive in American politics in 2024? What do you think?
I think it would be extraordinarily difficult in 2025, but people like Carter who are, true to themselves. Carter was always his authentic self. There was never any artifice about him, and people could never attack him on the basis that he was inauthentic. He stayed true to himself. He stayed true to his own heart, true to his relationship with Rosalind Carter. I think he would fight to the end to be truthful. He would serve as an example to others that you can be truthful. You shouldn't be a coward, that you should find value in not going along to get along or accepting lies. I wish that we had, a younger version of Jimmy Carter around now, because it's desperately, desperately needed. It's just the absence is just this chasm created by the absence of any sort of honesty or it shouldn't take courage to simply tell the truth or to simply call out a lie, but that's how we're defining it these days, which tells you how bad things have gotten.
So the answer obviously is no, they couldn't survive.
Yeah,
okay, we're talking.
The short answer. Yeah, the short answer would be I think no.
So,
and is it the way the media is now, with so many the misinformation, the multiple sources, the lack of trust?
The voters are so dependent upon being lied to about everything. I don't think they could handle the truth about anything.
I know, but we used to be able to.
I was going to say, I have to agree with you, Jim. I used to, when I was running for office, I used to say all the time, publicly, sometimes I'd say it in speeches, that, if you're going to be a public servant, if you're going to run for elected office, voters simply don't want to be lied to. Don't lie to them. And I would no more say that today than I tell people that the moon was made of green cheese. It just, people welcome an untruth that makes them somehow feel better or comfortable, or truth is hard, but people actually are at a point where they welcome it. They seek out news, even if the news is lying to them, that validates how they feel. That self-validation seems to be the most important thing.
Well, continuing that theme for a second, we know that tentatively Judge Merchan in New York City has scheduled a sentencing for Donald Trump. I assume that's unless the Supreme Court intervenes. We'll find out maybe by the end of today. I assume you were comforted, knowing you as I do, by the fact that when Justice Alito talked to Donald Trump, they never discussed any of these cases. Does that make you feel any better or no?
Yeah, I'm sure that they were both true to the incredibly circumspect people that both have revealed themselves to be.
Can you believe, by the way, can you believe that a day before, and of course they said it hadn't been filed yet, even though I, who know nothing about nothing, said of course he's going to appeal to the Supreme Court. So I assume Justice Alito knew that too. They talk on the phone, and Alito has a conversation with him because he wants to make a recommendation for an intern. He couldn't do that to the chief of staff of the president of the United States or anybody else. He's got to talk to the president, whatever, 10 days before an election and a day or two before they're deciding if he should be sentenced as a felon. I mean, it's unbelievable.
It is ludicrous on its face that, and for the fact that a Supreme Court justice would take the call, right? I can see Trump reaching out because Trump, there were no boundaries, right? But he took the call. First of all, this former law clerk clerked for him years and years ago.
14 years ago.
Since that time, he worked in the Justice Department, the very department he's seeking to return to, under Bill Barr. Now, even if Trump doesn't like Barr, there are tons of people in the Justice Department that would be able to speak for this individual. I have never heard of
Nor have I.
A Supreme Court justice, really most judges, speaking directly to the president-elect. He's not the president yet. He's still a private citizen, right? Who has nothing to do with the hiring. Now, so there's a couple of ways to look at this, right? There's we can look at it as the entire thing is a lie. He wasn't recommending anybody. He was talking to Trump about holding off on the sentencing. Trump wanted to make sure that Alito was on board. That, given Alito's history, is completely believable. But the other part of this is the idea that Alito would think nothing of setting a precedent like this for the entirety of the Supreme Court to welcome and take the phone call of the president-elect, ostensibly, for this reason, that he thinks nothing about the standards of the Supreme Court. And he took that, the whole thing, to your point, Jim, it's you run out of words to sort of describe this stuff as it's happening. But the level of disgrace and how he contributes to the ever diminishing credibility, I don't even know if they have any anymore, of the SCOTUS. And the poor example he is setting for judges in all of the lower courts and even the state courts, this is absolutely outrageous.
You know what I wonder? Where's the line? I mean, if they're drunk driving and run somebody over, if it's what do they have to do before there's some sort of you can't do that edict issued from John Roberts or somebody? You know what I mean?
Why do you assume there is a line?
Well, I think there is a line. What was it Eulogy that said in bed with a live woman or a dead boy, or a dead boy and a live woman or something like that, that you were in some kind of sex scandal? I mean, I there's got to be something that is too far, but I don't know what it is.
No, there isn't, because like I say, I'm going to say it again. I know I say it all the time. The worst possible time to find out that your entire governmental infrastructure and democracy runs on the honor system is when you have elected people who have no honor, or you have appointed people who have no honor. And the reason why we didn't confront this is because it didn't even occur to anyone that people would cross these lines. But what you also know about humans is that once a line is crossed without consequence, that is a slippery slope. You just keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. And we know we have people currently running the country who intend to demolish it all anyway.
Andrea, just to complete the circle around Merchon, we broached this with Juliet yesterday, but I want to confirm this. When I read that not only did Merchon say no jail time, no probation, no fine, the purpose of the sentencing, which I guess I wasn't aware of till yesterday, the day before, is that you are not formally a felon in this case, or in any case, until the sentencing has been completed. So that's the reason that Merchant is trying to get this done, even if there's no formal consequence of the sentencing. Is that accurate?
Yeah, initially I was really upset to hear that he had sort of forecast that he wasn't going to send him to jail. I was infuriated by it. And then I thought to myself, he knows that Merchant has to know that he's going to try to hold off on the sentencing. And this may not be Merchant's thinking, but it's possible. If he says, I don't intend to send him to prison, he gives SCOTUS no opportunity to say, he could face prison, and that would upend democracy because he is the
It's a
president-elect.
very good
What will
point.
happen with that?
Very good point.
So he may have been doing the smartest thing because at a minimum, he remains a convicted felon. Even if he doesn't go to prison or he's not formally put on probation, Merchant gave the SCOTUS no reason to hold off on this sentencing. Now, if they do it, there is no question whatsoever that they are doing it for a corrupt reason, and that is to help a president with whom they are ideologically aligned.
We're talking to Andrea Cabral.
So Andrea Cabral, Eileen Cannon, who's the judge appointed by Donald Trump, who has been very partial to Trump all the way along handling his cases, and in fact dismissed the case against him involving the classified documents down in Florida, now is saying that we're not going to see the Jack Smith report on those classified documents. But Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, I wish he'd just released them, but says he plans to release the Jack Smith documents on the January 6th insurrection attempt. So what do we make of all this?
Well, Aileen Cannon, who I think to her last breath is determined to show everyone how incompetent she is, has no jurisdiction over the January 6th case. She has jurisdiction over the case involving his theft of classified documents and holding them at Mar-a-Lago. And she has jurisdiction over his co-defendants, Walt Nada and Carlos de Oliveira, who helped him, kind of spirit these documents away from the prying eyes of the FBI. But she doesn't have jurisdiction over cases in other states. And so I think that's basically what Merrick Garland is saying is, I can still I'm not hearing any objection from any judge or any challenge from any judge on this other case, and I can release that. The other irony, although I think irony is completely dead, and hypocrisy has lost all meaning, is that Trump cheered the special counsel Robert Hur when he released his assessment of Joe Biden.
Yeah.
Trump was, that it's a special counsel's report. There's no reason the public shouldn't see it, and wanted it released. And now when it comes time for the special counsel's report on him to be released, he's pulling out all the stops to make because he knows it's damning. But I think Garland is on safe ground releasing the January 6th insurrection report. He'll wait until the 11th Circuit hears the Justice Department's appeal. And the 11th Circuit may very well say, overturn Cannon. I think they've had enough of Cannon. They've had to overturn her rulings in this case twice, and she delayed it long enough so that she could finally put it past the day of the election. And now, of course, it's been dismissed altogether. The 11th Circuit may very well overturn her, in which case both volumes would be released.
Wait a second. Wait. Exactly. If I wasn't aware of that, if Garland waits till the 11th Circuit and the 11th Circuit doesn't rule until after January 20th, it doesn't matter whether they overturn Cannon because there's a new Justice Department, and they're not. And Pam Bondi or whoever runs it is not going to release anything.
But I just assumed, I didn't read this, but I assumed, maybe wrongfully, that Smith is asking for an expedited ruling on it.
Maybe so.
I guess when I saw Garland, he's planning to release, I thought, God, can this guy ever do anything expeditiously?
Yeah.
Just release it.
Yeah.
Why do you have to announce you're releasing it? Just release the damn thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. But Cannon, the letter of Cannon's, I think Cannon did this on purpose. The letter of her ruling prohibits the release of the entire report.
That's right. Yeah.
He's trying to make it clear that she doesn't have jurisdiction over that versus just not technically violating the ruling, but I think he's cautious. That he has been cautious to the detriment of the country, and so I think that's I would have simply said, look, you have no jurisdiction over this other case and just released it, but that's not really what Merrick Garland.
One last thing about this, that there have been a couple of really interesting articles, which I guess are really nothing more than thought pieces, but they intrigued me, is the lawyers who are representing Trump in these proceedings, who are eviscerating the Justice Department and doing things that Trump likes to hear, to the point where, in many of these cases, judges have admonished them, saying you're really crossing the line. These are the same people who, in a couple of weeks or maybe beyond, because I guess there at least needs to be some confirmation, his lawyers are going to be, I think, the number 2 and number 3 people in the same Justice Department that they've been savaging. You know,
Yeah. Oh, I had to do the go through an ethics training. Governor appointed me to a commission on sheriffs and in collaboration with parole board and so on and so forth. And part of the requirement is you go through the state ethics commission's ethics training. Everybody who's considered an employee or special employee of the Commonwealth has to do that. And these are like fundamental basic things. And I'm going through this training and I'm thinking to myself, lawyers who have represented the President of the United States as a private citizen, who have a confidentiality privilege with him, are going to be sent by him to work for the Justice Department, which is supposed to represent all of the people of the United States. Invariably, there will be a conflict between what they know about him personally and something he is trying to force the Justice Department to do.
Excellent point I hadn't thought of, yeah.
And if these people are confirmed or allowed to work there, I mean, it really is over. There is no standard. There is literally, how this could even be contemplated is completely beyond me. It violates a conflict of interest that a third grader would be alerted to, would see that there was a problem with it. And yet, here we go. We're just sort of forging ahead.
Well, to paraphrase Groucho Marx, the instruction says, so easy, a 5th grader could put it together. Well, go find me a 5th grader. In any case, we are talking to, I know it's not that funny, I'm sorry. We're talking to Andrea Cabral, who his head is about to explode, and I'm right there with her.
Well, Andrea Cabral, something else our heads can explode about. The Boston Globe is reporting that state records show that more than 1,000 serious incidents, including nearly a dozen allegations of rape or sexual assault or other kinds of assault, and drug dealing and weapons possession and very bad stuff, were reported at Massachusetts emergency family shelters during the 20 months that the program tripled in size because of increases in people not being able to afford a home, and also immigrants coming into Massachusetts. Oddly, they've redacted where these incidents occurred. I don't know how helpful that is, because you'd think people living in those shelters would want to know. But in any case, what's your reaction?
Well, there's a couple of things. One is, when you triple the occupancy of shelters and you have people in various types of desperate circumstances. I mean, shelter community, we talk about homeless families, we talk about women and children that are fleeing domestic violence. Sometimes there are abusers that are also find themselves homeless, that seek, shelter within the shelter system. So tripling that population was bound to result in an increase. When I read the story, one of the things I sort of hoped I'd see is some sort of year-over-year comparison. I don't know that we pay a huge amount of attention to the numbers of assaults or incidences that happen in shelter, but for the fact that we now have a huge increase in migrants coming to the shelter. I can't remember the last time I saw a story about how many incidents happen in shelter just generally. So I would have liked to have seen a comparison. That said, any increase, I think, is of course due to the fact that you've got a lot more people seeking shelter. And it really does scream for a lot more attention to the levels of security that are present, because the other thing that's terrible about this is people who don't feel safe in shelter, sometimes even parents with children, will live on the street because they feel safer. And as we know, the weather has been absolutely freezing. It's been deadly out there, but it's just not safe to live on the street either.
But, Marjorie mentioned when she was introducing the topic, Andrea Cabral, that the state, when they released the documents, and it took them a while to release them and request a response to FO, Freedom of Information requests, I believe, redacted the locations. Don't people living in these facilities have a right to, I don't mean a legal right, but a right to know how safe their particular facility has been so that they can make a decision about themselves or their kid or their partner or whatever?
They do. And I don't know that necessarily putting it in the report and having it released via, a story in the Globe is the way to tell people. But you certainly could notify residents of a particular shelter that there have been allegations of criminal activity, so that they can make decisions about, whether or not they can stay there or stay with other relatives. But I think you do that on a more, interpersonal basis versus having them pick up the paper and read that things have been going on in a particular shelter. And you would notify them, I would think, well before a final report was completed.
Talking to Andrea Cabral.
Yeah, and by the way, at least some of these incidents were people that are Americans, because one of them was an Uber driver, so he is not a recent arrival from someplace else.
Well, by the way, when Governor Healy was with us the other day, she made an important point that I think a lot of people ignore. These are not just people who have entered this country who are either looking for
More
a job.
than half
are people
who
homeless who are
homeless.
Residents of the state beyond.
And that's
just
why I
recently.
made the point that I made earlier, that it would have been nice to see a year-over-year
Yeah, that's a good
comparison
point.
because people assume when they see a story like this in the times in which we live that migrants are committing these crimes, and that is not necessarily the case. And in fact, what you usually find is that migrants commit crime at a far lower rate than people who are born here, are naturalized citizens, have been here for a long period of time.
By the way, I just want to emphasize that because we hear the exact opposite from certain people in positions of power. The data overwhelmingly makes the case that an immigrant, even if they are undocumented here, is far less likely to commit a crime than somebody who is a citizen of the country.
So, Andrea, in the couple of minutes we have left, this is a heartening story about a program for people who are incarcerated getting training. CDL training is what they call it. Tell us about this.
It is. It's a great program. There's an organization called Emerge Career. And so it's a nonprofit, and it focuses specifically on helping people who've been incarcerated sort of re-enter, get a good job, and sort of get back into regular life. And they have been partnering with sheriff's departments to offer folks who have done sentences at the House of Correction the appropriate training. You can get the training for the learner's permit while you're still incarcerated. And then once you are released, you can go out and get your actual CDL license. So this is to be able to, it's a commercial driver's license. You can drive a truck. That's a very lucrative career. There are lots of job openings in that career, especially since we now have everything that we buy delivered to us. There are tons of individual truck drivers who get contracts with places like Amazon to do deliveries, and you could join a company, and the starting pay averages about $75,000 a year. It doesn't cost anything for the trainees to do the program. And what I would say about this is that I will say this on behalf of the Massachusetts sheriffs. They've been doing reentry and programming along these lines since 2001. They were way ahead of the curve, even across the country, on this kind of stuff. And so they're now at the point where the kinds of programs that they can welcome into their facilities are sanctioned by the state. In Suffolk County, there's the Common Ground Institute program, which started when I was sheriff, became a certified apprenticeship program under the state. So if you do that program in Suffolk County, it's the same as if you did a certified apprenticeship program outside of the walls under the state, and you then get your certificates and your training, and it's all vocational. And that's where the focus was in reentry the entire time, was vocational training. And this CDL program is absolutely fabulous. It's in Worcester right now. They have, I think there are 3 other sheriff's offices that it's in, and then there are 2, Suffolk and Norfolk are on the waiting list. That's how popular it is, that there are 2 of the offices on the waiting list. So it's fabulous, and it gives people an opportunity to get back with their families, be able to support them, and it keeps people from being homeless.
And reduces recidivism dramatically, by the way.
Dramatically.
Huge numbers. Great program. Hey, Andrea, it's nice to see you. Be well. We'll
Good
talk
to
to you
see you
soon.
both.
Take care.
Thank you, Andrea. We have been speaking with former Suffolk County Sheriff and former Massachusetts Secretary of Public Safety, Andrea Cabral, who joins us every week. Coming up after a quick break, former Massachusetts Education Secretary Paul Reville will zoom in. You're listening to Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News.
part of the GBH News Equity and Justice Unit.
We often talk about equity and justice in politics and government.
Senior digital producer Megan Smith.
But I think one thing we want to focus on is how communities are doing that themselves. We want to tell more community-focused stories about what people are doing in their own community to overcome those injustices that they see.
Elevating issues of equity and justice. GBH 89.7.
Our programs are made possible thanks to you and Subaru of New England. This winter, the all-wheel drive 2025 Subaru Forester is committed to keeping your loved ones safe on snowy roads. You can find your Subaru retailer at SubaruofNewEngland.com. And McLean Middleton, a regional law firm with over 100 attorneys and locations in Woburn and Boston, serving clients for over 100 years in the areas of corporate law, tax law, litigation, and estate planning. McLean.com.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy and Marge Regan. We're live from Studio 3 at GBH and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News, so you can watch this thing too. We're back at the library tomorrow. A reminder, and our apologies because of the funeral and everything, we didn't bring this up, obviously. The text prompt of the day, you don't have much time to respond. We wish you would. And we'll read some of our favorites right before 1 o'clock. When public officials or heads of major organizations are accused of misconduct, and their response is either no response, to hide out, or not to answer at all, is it fair for the public to conclude that they are guilty of whatever it is that they're accused of having done? Give us a text, because we're upset that so much of the strategy now in the political world is to essentially duck and hope that the press and the public will forget the issue that you're arguably on the wrong side of. 877-301-8970. Get them in quickly, and Marjorie will read a few right for the 1 o'clock news. We're joined now on Zoom by Paul Reville. Paul is the former Secretary of Education from Massachusetts, professor at Harvard University's Graduate School of Education, where he runs the Ed Redesign Lab. His latest book, co-authored with Lynn Sachs, Collaborative Action for Equity and Opportunity. Paul, it's good to see you.
Hello, Jim and Marjorie.
Hey, Paul, great to see you as well. So let's start with, we always heard, or at least for a long time we heard, that girls basically did better, particularly in reading in school. Well, this study out of the Wall Street Journal says since 2019, girls have lost ground in reading, math, and science to alarming rates. Boys' scores have fallen too, but not by so much. So what's going on?
Well, there's been an ebb and flow in the performance of girls relative to boys and vice versa over time. And it is disturbing that you see, particularly in math, because that's where it shows up most, that girls' scores have declined and boys are outperforming there. On the other hand, when you look beyond scores and you look at educational attainment, you look at factors like high school graduation and college enrollment, then there's some really deep concerns about boys. I mean, college enrollment is roughly 60% female now, 40% male. So, I mean, there are concerns across the board. And there's been just enormous learning loss for both boys and girls subsequent, during and subsequent to COVID. So I think school systems across the nation are coping with that generally, but obviously they've got to pay more attention to girls, particularly in the area of math.
And what's the thesis as to what happened? The only thing I've read is that during COVID, the one of the additional responsibilities that took them away from education girls was they were filling the holes in the needs of the family more than young boys were. You buy that, or what do you buy?
I mean, that probably was a factor. I mean, I've also heard it hypothesized that, as people came back to school, students came back to school, there were more behavioral problems with boys manifesting in class, and boys, sopped up more attention than girls in that regard. And that girls, another hypothesis is girls are more, connected with school, and so the disconnection was more, negative for girls. The fact that school stopped and they didn't have the connection with peers and they didn't have the day-to-day had a more powerful impact on girls and boys. I don't know that to be true, but those are some theories.
I know I've asked you this before, but big picture, what is the theory among educators about why America used to lead the world in education? We don't anymore. What's the theory? Other countries got better, or we've gotten worse, or what?
Well, this has been a long-term trend. I mean, we first as a nation, I think, began noticing this in the 1980s. There was that famous report in 1983, which incidentally was part of the Reagan administration's first step in education when they were committed to eliminating the Department of Education. And you had the Secretary of Education decided to impanel a group to make the case that education was important in the national interest. And one of the most important factors cited in that report was international competition. And you had countries like South Korea outperforming then at higher levels across the population, countries like the United States in topics like math and language. And so this has been something that's going on for a long time. The whole standards movement in this country, the idea that we would have high standards and really hold people's feet to the fire on achieving those standards, both educators and students. As you can see, in recent months, we've backed off that here in Massachusetts. We have a hard time holding to a standard in this country as much as some other countries do, and so I think that's been part of the problem. And and we haven't paid as much attention to the quality of instruction or to the factors in children's lives outside of school that get in the way of them attending school and bringing their best effort when they get there.
You just slipped in there the ballot question results, getting rid of MCAS's graduation requirement. It's now 2 months and a few days since the question, and I'll ask you the same question we asked you in advance. Should it win? And I think the one time we've spoken to you, at least since it lost, are discussions going on about any statewide kinds of uniform standards that might replace the MCAS graduation requirement thing? Or is it every city and town for itself?
Well, I mean, right now it is every city or town itself, and right now, in my judgment, we've devalued the Massachusetts high school diploma considerably and hurt our reputation as the leading education state.
But that was I know, but people decided to do it.
Yeah, but to answer the main part of your question, yes, there are vigorous conversations going on. I know I hear discussions from the legislature. I know the Board of Education has been talking about this. There is deep concern, as there ought to be, in the administration, in the legislature, and at the Board of Education. So I would hope that there'll be some, pretty concrete steps taken in pretty short order here to rectify the situation. So we just don't have, let 1,000 flowers bloom and standards come radically different in one district than another. And so that when you actually have a Massachusetts high school diploma, as far as an employer or college is concerned, it's meaningless because they don't really know what it stands for.
Well, again, the voters felt otherwise. But the question is, what do people in positions of power do now?
I have not mentioned my feelings on this. Jim has mentioned his twice. I just want to point that out.
Well, you mentioned about 2,000 times before election day,
right.
and they were rejected.
Open, Marjorie.
What?
No.
So,
I mean, the voters wanted to devalue
but they only
it.
spoke because the voters wanted to devalue
Well, I
it.
think
My
they
God.
did.
Okay, let's move on. Paul,
it's a bad way to make policy.
Okay, but we did. Okay, fine. So, respectfully, let's move on. We broached this with you right after the election. Because the winner of the election said he wanted to eliminate the education department. But we're bringing it up again for two reasons. One, because we heard again today, the person who established the Department of Education had his funeral today, and that was one of his achievements. And I have to say, maybe you said this, but when I read more than, and I should have done this before we spoke last time, about what does the Federal Department of Education do? $18 billion for systems with low-income students, $14 billion for more than 7 million special ed kids, $24 billion in Pell Grants. There is no chance in hell that enough Republicans in slim majorities in the House and the Senate are going to vote for this unless it's folded in to some mammoth bill, which I know is Trump's goal, where people say, well, I really don't want to get rid of it, but I like the other stuff, so I'll vote for it. So how worried are you about the elimination of the Federal Department of Education?
I'm not particularly worried for the reasons that you mentioned. I think there are tremendous interests in retaining particularly the funding that's associated with the department. However, it's important to recognize that one could preserve the provisions of funding there that would be very difficult to have Congress reverse, and you'd have to have Congress vote to reverse that. Um, you could still retain the funding provisions, but
In other
move
departments?
the functions to different departments and symbolically eliminate the Department of Education. But it's not clear what that would accomplish, particularly for an administration who's now sort of toying with the idea of making more federal requirements, for example, for receiving federal money, having to do with the various issues in cultural wars
That's
and
a very good point.
transgender and all these kinds of things. They're going to need a department to enforce that. And they're not going to get it if they send it over to labor or human services and things of that nature. So I think it's highly unlikely. This was not, a top priority in President-elect Trump's campaign. He doesn't have an experienced leader coming in to move the federal government in this direction, and Congress is going to be deeply divided on these issues.
Did you see him talking up Barack Obama there before the funeral? Were you watching this thing? He was talking
did not
Obama.
see that.
It was rather incredible, actually. They
whispering
sat
in
next to
Obama's
each
ear.
other, and he
Yeah.
was talking. It was really, I'm dying to hear if
Oh,
anybody ever
wow.
leaks what they were talking
I know.
about.
We were all surprised. Good piece in the Globe about financial literacy in Massachusetts high school. I guess they have a program to teach kids about taxes and credit cards and debt and stuff at a few high schools, but not all over this state. Should we have these, and are we unusual in not having them in every school district?
Well, I saw the same article. They said 23 states within a couple of years will have a substantial requirement for financial literacy. We don't have it. It's been proposed for a long time. There's been the reluctance we've talked about many times before to have the legislature specifying the curriculum. We've been a very restrained state in terms of what we require. We only have the absolute minimal state requirements for graduation. So the state has avoided doing that, which in general I think is a good thing. But on the other hand, the financial literacy inarguably is something that every student needs going forward. There was an attempt to work this into our standards, for example, in the math standards. And I don't know how deeply embedded it is. It doesn't appear to be having as much of an impact as it ought to have. And we don't, we have widespread gaps in students' knowledge about, basic elements of financial, laws and regulations and credit cards and loans and interest and so on and so forth that they really need to know. So I think we should be doing more in this area. I'm not sure specifying a course requirement from the level of the state legislature is the way to go, but I would think about beefing up our standards in this regard.
But didn't it also say in the Globe story which is fairly, it sort of harkens back to, I wouldn't say my outrage, didn't rise to that level, my incredulity that the legislature was celebrating like they did a year or so ago when they mandated the content of sex education courses. And then we learned they were only mandating it in places that already had sex education courses. And I'm sure I said to you, I would argue the places that need sex education the most are the places that don't have it, and the legislature is not dealing with that. Same situation here. According to the Globe, the wealthier communities are the ones that have these programs, these courses around financial literacy, and it would seem to me that low and moderate income kids are probably the ones that need it the most. So I have to say, I understand the principle, but the radical adherence, with the exception of the MCAS graduation requirement and very few other things, to this notion that the state should never tell cities and towns what to do. The SJC said you can tell 177 cities and towns that they have to have greater density of zoning near T-stops. What is the problem here in terms of the state saying this is an important value for every community to have, Paul Reville?
Well, I think it's great that it's been teed up now, because what makes this different than the sex education example that you gave is that it's not nearly as controversial.
Right.
That's a good point.
Both parties, red and blue, everybody unites on the idea that young people need to know things about finance. And so this would be a good topic to push through in a way that, again, might not be a course mandate because the legislature also for other reasons, because as you know, the legislature doesn't want to do unfunded mandates because then they'll be required to fund the addition of a new course in every district across the Commonwealth. But, you know, putting this more strongly, more visibly into our state standards of what we expect people to graduate, of course, again, without, you know, the question too, you know, with the result there, without any pressure for districts to actually have to respond to this. So that's something that has to be worked out. But I think there's an opportunity here. I think it'd be a good opportunity to take advantage of because I think it's long overdue that students get more attention to financial literacy.
We're talking to Paul Reville. I know you're dying to do school closings, and it's further down the list. Why don't you jump to it if you want to
Well,
talk
it's just,
about it?
you know, I'm always rooting for the Boston Public Schools because I think a lot of people would live in Boston and stay in Boston, a lot of middle class people, if they thought the schools were better, and it would be good to have a more diverse student body there, financially diverse, I think, student body there. And closing these schools that are really old, falling apart, and kids aren't going to anymore has always been a good idea, but it's really hard to do because people get attached to their schools. Michelle Wu was trying to do it yet again. What do you think about school closings?
And by the way, not just in Boston, but it's impossible everywhere, isn't it? Politically?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a third rail if you're a superintendent or a mayor. I mean, look what happened to Rahm Emanuel in Chicago.
What happened to Rahm Emanuel in Chicago?
Well, he pushed through some very abrupt school closings on an almost overnight basis, and that was basically the end of his mayoralty as far as that went. I mean, so I think this, to come back to this, I mean, I think this is a courageous move on the mayor's part, particularly to do this in an election year. I think it's a much better approach than they had last time. It's been thoughtful. It's measured. It's way overdue and much needed. I mean, the enrollment is way down. We're spending money that ought to be spent on program, on academics and teachers, on heating and supporting buildings that are way too big for the populations that are there. We also have, you know, an active building program going on so that, you know, this is going to be gradual. It's going to be measured over time. And I think that the district, you know, got significant pushback a year ago. They went out to the community. They started with asking the community for a clear definition of what a high quality student experience ought to contain. They developed criteria around this, and then they developed data in terms of which schools were able to provide that high quality experience and which weren't, and they developed a closing list accordingly. And now they've brought it out into public. The initial reception, at least as far as I can see, seems to be quite positive. So hats off to the mayor and the superintendent. They absolutely have to do it. I mean, this is imperative for the Boston Public Schools. Not easy to do, and I applaud them for having the courage to take it up.
Yeah, they save money on buses because they wouldn't be busing to all these different schools too.
Well, that among other things that they'd save on,
Yep.
yes.
Yep.
You know, it just as an anecdotal thing, one of the places that's proposed to be closed is the Devers School. And my younger kid was a city year kid there about 12 or 13 years
what
ago.
kind of shape was it in?
When I went into school to visit her the first time, the kids could not drink the water in any of the
Exactly.
faucets or the bubblers, as they call them in New England. Water fountains is what we called them where I came from. And all paint falling down from
yeah.
the walls. It was a physical infrastructure disaster. I have no idea in retrospect about the quality of the teaching, but it's really, I mean, you know this better than I, obviously, Paul. It's pretty hard to learn when you can't drink the water, when the paint chips are like falling down all around. It was a total dump. And they're finally proposing to close it a mere, 13 years later.
Well, I mean, sadly, that situation is not unique. There
I
are
know.
a lot of situations around the BPS schools that look like that and turn parents off. And those who have choice are, you know, to your point, Marjorie, are going to go elsewhere. That's why we see private school enrollment going up, and we see the city enrollment, although it's stabilized recently, has been going down. So we have to do something about it. And in fact, we are doing something about it. But still in all, you know, that you get pushback, even if you propose closing a building that's got problems. That school not only had physical plant problems, but it had school performance problems and was in receivership for a long period of time. There were many reasons that you needed a do-over there, a start over, and thank God it's come. So I hope that the school committee has the backbone to stand up and endorse these changes, and we can move ahead. And we have every right to expect another set of closings and mergers coming next year to really right-size this district, which over time is best for taxpayers, it's best for students and teachers. We can't ask students and teachers to go to schools and to work in schools day in and day out under the kind of circumstances you described, Jim.
So I think a lot of people were very happy when community colleges became free for students. But this Globe piece accentuates maybe something people didn't think through, that they've had they talk about Cape Cod Community College in West Barnstable, how the enrollment has skyrocketed. It's grown by nearly a third, but the number of faculty and staff is below what it was 10 years ago. So what do we do about that?
We have a minute or so, Paul.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. No. I'm glad you brought it up.
The capacity, and particularly faculty capacity at community colleges, is a big issue and needs attention and needs investment. I mean, one of the issues that isn't mentioned in that article, but it's been pervasive even before all of this happened, is the over-reliance on adjunct professors who are only on campus for a limited periods of time. They teach a course and then they have to leave, and therefore you don't have the faculty presence and the advising presence that so many students need as they're adjusting to community college life. So that's been a problem for a long time. We need to invest more deeply in full-time faculty at community colleges, particularly with an enrollment increase. I mean, it's just obvious that's what needs to happen. So somehow the revenue that should be following these students needs to be targeted toward building faculty and support staff, or we're just going to have a continuing high attrition rate in community colleges.
Now, one of the sad things, because we're out of time, is I was intending to give both you and Marjorie unlimited time to speak about the voters' decision to eliminate the MCAS as a graduation requirement. But sadly, we're out of time. So maybe next time, Paul, you and Marjorie can wax poetic about...
That's right.
I thought we had a New Year's resolution not to beat dead horses.
Yeah, well, that's a good one because it's done. It's done. Yeah. That's done.
It's
Charter
done.
schools
Where
is
we
done.
go from here?
We're going in the wrong direction, if you ask me. But
okay, fine.
Nobody asked me.
Nobody asked you. No, it's not that you were asked. You voted, and you lost.
We got to go to a better place from here and not do overly simplistic ballot measures to figure it out.
Okay,
Thank
you
you,
did
Paul
get
Reville.
it in there.
We have been speaking.
Good to see you, Paul Reville.
Thank you, Paul.
All right, good to see both of you. Happy New Year.
And
to
you
you
as
too.
well.
We've been speaking with Paul Reville, former Secretary of Education from Massachusetts and a professor at Harvard University's Graduate School of Education, where he also leads the Ed Redesign Lab. After a quick break, when public officials and other members in the public eye get accused of misconduct and their response is to hide out, is it fair for the public to conclude they are guilty as charged? We ask you to weigh in. We'll read our favorite texts, or as many texts as we can, after a quick break. You're listening to Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH. We are streaming at youtube.com/GBH News.
It has not been a quiet 4 years for Bill Burns as director of the CIA.
I've taken 84 trips overseas during that time, covered more than 1 million miles, and it's just deepened the pride that I have in the work of this agency.
I'm Mary Louise Kelly. I sit down with Burns on his way out to ask about Russia, Iran, ISIS, and more. That story on All Things Considered from NPR News.
Today at 4, here on GBH News 89.7.
Support for our programs comes from you. And Paramount Pictures, presenting the new film September 5, When Gunshots Are Heard in the Olympic Village, Broadcast History is Made, based on a true story, in select theaters now, everywhere January 17th, rated R. And Trinity Rep, presenting Someone Will Remember Us. This moving new play is based on the real-life testimonies of U.S. military veterans, a Gold Star family, Iraqi civilians, and refugees living in Rhode Island. Opens January 23rd, trinityrep.com.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy and Marjorie Egan. We are streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. We'll be back at the library tomorrow. Sadly, we didn't introduce the texting topic to you to the last minute. and our apologies for that. But essentially the question was, is silence from public officials, the heads of organizations who are accused of inappropriate behavior, let's be kind, first of all, it's become an epidemic in my estimation. I'll ask Marjorie as a longtime reporter if she agrees. And secondly, my rule of thumb is if you refuse to answer a question and you're in a public posture about a critical issue, I think it's fair to conclude that you're guilty as charged. Before we get into the text for a second, when you were doing columns and reporters, did public officials and public people at corporations refuse to answer legitimate public interest questions like they do now?
I think they did a lot less because the power of the newspapers was much greater than it is today, and people think that they can get away with it because they think not as many people read the Globe, or that when the Herald, almost no one reads the Herald's lost.
Can I be arrogant for a second?
Mm-hmm.
We're the top midday show in Boston, and we invited the Senate president and the speaker to join us because they were the lead opponents to the auditor ballot question. And they're complaining, by the way, that the media doesn't get it right. They could express their own opinion.
They could.
Did they show up?
No, they did not.
They did not, exactly.
Well, here's what some of the texters say. Basically, that here's an anonymous one. When I read no comment in the paper, I hear guilty, guilty, guilty. Ryan in Wales, Massachusetts says absolutely guilty. The second you say no comment, you just admitted your guilt without question. And then Susan in Cranston says, yes, it applies guilt. Sam from Providence talked about something called adverse inference. Do you know about this concept, Jim?
Yeah, he's addressing it to me. I know, yeah.
Yeah. You want to
Well, no, just read his thing.
Inference?
It's perfect. Right there. You can draw an adverse interest from their failure to respond to a legitimate charge. Let me give you a current effect. We have talked to the Attorney General, the Governor, and Bruce Marks, who runs this NACA, this housing program, about this Blue Hub Capital. And two of the three of them are not crazy about what was slipped into legislation that the governor signed. We discussed it with the governor a couple of days ago. We've invited Elise Cherry, who runs the organization, a bunch of times. I am told because I've taken my position already, which, by the way, don't we have positions on most issues when we have governors come in and sometimes they're contrary to theirs?
We're very opinionated.
They come in, don't they?
They do.
And they debate these things with us. Well, I mean, just give you an example. And so far they refuse to come in. They send us a long memo after the governor thing. I said it was slipped in at the last minute. They said we went through a legitimate legislative process. Well, what legitimate process was a hearing a year and a half before. No roll call vote, no debate. They go on to say, well, it gives additional oversight, this legislation. Can you hold that just for a second, John, please, to the Attorney General? Well, the Attorney General apparently doesn't want it because she opposes this, because this legislation, slipped in at the last minute, provides an exemption from consumer protection laws for this one company. It's not named in the legislation. This shared appreciation mortgage, where they buy a mortgage that's about to be foreclosed upon, then give you another mortgage. They share in whatever profit this kind of thing is. And as the AG said, she can't think of one other company that has a consumer protection exemption. So if we're getting this all wrong, and it was the total right thing to do, we would say, instead of sending memos and saying you'll be treated unfairly, no one else has ever rejected our invitation except the Speaker and the Senate President in 25 years. We'd invite you to come. And my position about this is, like everything else we said at the beginning of this discussion, if it turns out there's a serious charge against you, and there's a lawsuit by a lot of tenants, by the way, saying there's predatory lending practices, if you're not willing to respond publicly, then I think it's fair to people to conclude that you were guilty as charged.
Okay, up after the 1 o'clock news, Boston business columnist Shirley.
Structures engulfed in flames is seen across the Los Angeles area for yet another day. At least 5 deaths are now linked to the fires, which have multiplied to 5. One of the biggest is the Eaton fire. This latest update from Fire Chief Anthony Maroney.
The Eaton fire remains estimated to be 10,600 acres, and growth has been significantly stopped. And we have 0% containment.
Nearly 180,000 people in Los Angeles County have been ordered to evacuate. 200,000 more are being told to prepare to do the same. CAL FIRE Incident Commander Todd Hopkins said they're flying over the devastated neighborhoods and using heat signatures to estimate the number of structures affected by the fires. He said their calculations of the damage assessment include vehicles, outbuildings, homes, businesses, and other structures like sheds.
NPR's Windsor Johnson spoke with a climate expert about drought conditions in Southern California.
Park Williams is a hydroclimatologist in the Department of Geography at UCLA. He says Southern California is a unique environment that makes it highly susceptible to these types of wind-driven wildfires.
We get these so-called Santa Ana wind events, which are wind events that go in basically the wrong direction. Usually winds come off of the ocean into Southern California, and so they're cool and humid. But when these Santa Ana wind events occur, the winds reverse and they come from the deserts.
Williams says a couple of years ago, the Los Angeles region experienced a stretch of unusually wet weather, which fueled the growth of a lot of new vegetation that got extremely dry this year. Windsor Johnston, NPR News.
At the National Cathedral in Washington, the state funeral for former President Jimmy Carter has just concluded. Carter's casket will return to Georgia, where he will be laid to rest. He died late last month at the age of 100. The Manhattan District Attorney asked the U.S. Supreme Court not to halt the criminal sentencing of President-elect Donald Trump in the New York hush money case. NPR's Jimena Bustillo reports the sentencing is scheduled for tomorrow.
Trump is asking the country's highest court to halt his sentencing over falsifying business records. In a legal filing, prosecutors say that there is, quote, no basis for the Supreme Court to intervene in a pending state criminal trial before it's been sentenced. They also argue that any pause threatens to delay the completion of the case until Trump finishes his presidential term. Trump is scheduled to be sworn in as president on January 20th. The New York judge presiding over the case has rejected these claims and declined to postpone the sentencing. Jimena Bustillo, NPR News, New York.
It's NPR.
Good afternoon. With the latest from the GBH Newsroom, I'm Henry Santoro. We've been reporting on a surge of norovirus cases in the region, and now we're seeing a later-than-normal winter surge in COVID-19 cases in the state as well as the country. It's catching some Massachusetts residents by surprise. Health experts call the current uptick cases a silent surge because it comes after a long lull in COVID-19 transmission. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention shows that data from wastewater estimates that 1 in 49 people, or about 2.1% of the U.S. population, are currently infected with COVID. It's never too late to mask up, and we'll have much more on hospitals updating their masking policies on GBH's All Things Considered coming up at 4 this afternoon. Service providers in Massachusetts shelter system are trying to tamp down on worries about crime inside the shelters. That's after the state released documents detailing more than 1,000 incidents of domestic violence, sexual abuse, and other offenses. The release came in response to public records request from the Boston Globe and the Boston Herald. Daniel Ferrer is CEO of Heading Home, a group that's running some of the shelters. She says a reality check is needed.
To think that we have programs that the state funds where we serve our highest risk populations who have the highest stress levels and that there'll be no safety incidents regardless of tax dollars is an unrealistic expectation.
This week, Governor Maura Healey ordered a safety inspection of all shelters across the state. We're at 28 degrees in Boston right now. Feels like 8. This is GBH News.
Eastern Browdy, I am Marjorie Egan. Welcome to hour number 3 of Boston Public Radio, streaming from Studio 3 in Brighton at youtube.com/GBH News. We're going to be back at the Boston Public Library tomorrow. Live music via players performing in this year's Boston Celtic Music Festival. Also, former Governor Deval Patrick will zoom in as he's about to receive a major honorary award from In the Embrace Martin Luther King Boston group.
As is Irene Monroe.
Irene Monroe.
Governor Baker.
We're very excited.
A whole bunch of Thea James, who is Irene's incredible wife, Boston City Hospital. And so we're now joined on Zoom by Boston Globe business columnist Shirley Leung. Shirley also hosts the podcast Say More with Shirley Leung, new episodes every Thursday. Hi, Shirley.
Marjorie, I'm using this new YouTube this new YouTube streaming you guys are doing. Of course, I don't know how to unblur my background.
What does the background say? We'll decide if we were going to be excited
Globe,
about it.
Right? The Boston Globe.
I set it up. My official Boston Globe
But you know what?
Well, I'd say that's a
you
failure.
look terrific.
Yeah, you
look
do
terrific.
look good.
I'm not feeling so well today, so I don't look so great. but
Okay, I'm so sorry to hear that.
Thank you.
That's okay.
Okay, so we have been watching this unbelievable tragedy unfolding in California with these wildfires, and you told our staff here that you've got a mother-in-law who's 85 years old who lives right next to Pasadena, which is on fire. So, what's happening?
I was just in Los Angeles for the holidays. I mean, I came back January 1st. And so my mother-in-law lives in Glendale, which is the town next to Pasadena, which is one of the towns that's burning right now and being evacuated. And so we've been in contact with my mother-in-law. My husband has his whole family's, from LA. He grew up in the San Fernando Valley in LA. And so we saw lots of family there. So I'm very familiar with that area and where the fires are happening. We drove through Pasadena. We were in San Gabriel Valley for dim sum. It's a very densely populated area, and my husband's aunt, they both live in Glendale, and we have family in Sherman Oaks, which is about 20 minutes away, another part of LA, and they were like, come stay with us in Sherman Oaks. You might be a little more safer here. But the highways are so jammed, it's like bumper to bumper. So they don't feel like leaving. But where they are in Glendale, and Glendale is very, I asked, how is can you smell the smoke? And they said the air quality is pretty bad right now in Glendale.
So wait, did your mother-in-law, did they evacuate, or what's their?
No. Think about it, she's 85. She doesn't really drive that much. The traffic is pretty bad. Maybe this was yesterday. And Sherman Oaks, the fire, there's like 5 fires. Sherman Oaks could be the next place that gets hit too. So there's a sense of, where do you go? LA's running out of water. I think her power was on and off yesterday. So I assume a lot of the schools are probably closed. And so I don't know what you do. We complain here about how cold it is, but I would rather take this Arctic air. I know how to deal with that. I can't deal with fires. I don't know what you do.
You mentioned the evacuation, how difficult it's been because some of the roads are so narrow. Did you hear reports last night that there were so many cars trying to evacuate that some fire officials were telling people to leave their cars, get out of their cars, and run. That's how fast moving the fires were.
You listen to some of these places, Mulholland Drive, which is so famous, and Hollywood, and the Hollywood Hills, which is so famous, and Highway 1, which is such a beautiful highway. These places that we've all, just thought were like heaven on earth are up in flames. It's just horrible.
Yeah. And again, like the areas that they're talking about on TV, like I've been there, we went to the Getty, there's 2 Getty villas, Getty museums. We went to the newer one, but the other one, which is not that far away, was the one that was threatened by the fires. But again, the newer Getty is right by Santa Monica. The way the fire, you can see how the fires can move very quickly. So it's really frightening. I literally was there just, 8 days ago in LA, and now, if I were there now, I probably could smell the smoke and see smell the smoke and see the smoke.
By the way, Shirley, you're going to get a small bonus in your check because the Boston Globe logo behind you has appeared in clear focus. So there are a lot of people who are very, very happy.
I figured out how to unblur my background.
and by the way, we should point out, too, that the President-elect Trump is blaming Gavin Newsom, the governor there, for not taking enough water out of the areas that are protected for smelts, which are small fish. But the scientific community is saying that this is a combination of extremely powerful Santa Ana winds, which are a normal thing in California, those Santa Ana winds, but they're at 100+ miles an hour now. And the first of a lifetime drought as bad as this preceding these fires. So it has to do with climate change.
Well, the merits also. What kind of a person who's leading or about to lead the country attacks the leader of a state that is living through
denier, so he can't say this could.
Well, maybe he could say nothing except my hopes and prayers or whatever he says.
But that's what this is going to turn into. This is going to turn into the smelts Smelts did it. That's what we're going to
Okay,
be
so
reading in the
speaking of
coming
people
days.
who are friendly with the incoming president, you had a really interesting conversation with a person behind this new Boston Globe podcast, The Harvard Plan.
It's a great podcast.
Tell us, it really, really, really is on a really important topic. Fill us in on both the podcast and then your interview.
Yeah. So Ilya Meritz is, he worked a long time at NPR and when your sister station in New York is a WNYC, and he just released a 3-part series with the Globe and WNYC called The Harvard Plan. And if you can imagine, a year ago, we were all talking about the sudden departure of Claudine Gay, the president of Harvard, and how she was pushed out, forced to step down. Conservative forces really came after her, alleging her that she is a plagiarist. She also, mishandled some of the a congressional hearing where she was asked about campus anti-Semitism and how she would deal with it. And so she was out. And so this is a 3-part series looking back at what happened, what were the forces behind Claudine Gay's ouster. And Ilya actually was at Harvard. I mean, he had a front row seat to this. He was a Nieman Fellow, which is for journalists. And here he is supposed to take a year off, right? and go to classes. And he was at Claudine Gay's. I mean, she was inaugurated, I guess, she took office July 1st, 2023. She was inaugurated in September 2023, just when, students like Ilya were coming to campus. So he actually went to her inauguration and talked about how hopeful everyone was. She's the first Black president of Harvard, it would signal like new bold leadership, but within 6 months she was out.
One of the leaders of that effort to get her out, obviously we've talked about him a lot, was Bill Ackman. You had an interesting conversation with Meritz about that. Here's a little bit from Shirley's podcast about Ackman's behavior in this whole thing. This is off the hearing where Elise Stefanik, who now rode that in her sycophancy for Donald Trump to be the ambassador to the UN. Here's a little bit about Ackman.
Bill Ackman, the hedge fund guy and Harvard graduate who had really been kind of like the ringleader of the Twitter critics of Claudine Gay, he described on a podcast, and we use a clip of it, he described being in a barber's chair watching the hearing as it unfolded, and he texts one of his assistants, and he's like, snip that piece, I'm going to tweet it out. And then he does tweet it out, and he calls it one of my greatest hits of Twitter.
That was really, that's beautiful. That is a perfect little bite there. Again, it's called, you should listen obviously to Shirley Say More, but the Globe podcast series with NYC and whatever else, the Harvard Plan, what it's called. I'm sorry, Shirley, go ahead.
Yeah, you can find it wherever you get your podcasts. And what also you find out from Ilya is that not only was Ackman involved, but Ackman got involved with Chris Rufo, and Chris Rufo is this conservative activist who was behind uncovering the allegations of plagiarism against Claudine Gay, and he'd been working on that story for months. And so they all, and then I think Ackman ended up reading Rufo's book, and so there was a sense that they all got together. I mean, maybe it was coordinated at the end, maybe not the beginning, but they all found each other, in that kind of 3-month period between September and December, and Bill Ackman, again, is a Harvard alum, and so it was kind of the donors, the alums, conservative forces. I mean, one of the other things that was really interesting about Ilya's reporting is that there was a Harvard alum named Paul Singer, and he, big conservative, finance guy, and he actually is chairman of the Manhattan Institute, which bankrolled, kind of what Chris Rufo was doing as a conservative activist and other conservative journalists as well.
By the way, no one is denying here, so you don't have to text this. Gay's performance and the performance of some of the other presidents in front of that education committee was just horrible.
It was horrible.
However, there's a deeper story than just what
Yeah.
she didn't do and they didn't do.
Sometimes you
at that
shouldn't
hearing.
listen to the lawyers, I think, is one of the
I
lessons
agree,
learned from
or
that.
not pay the lawyers. So, I assume, I didn't meant to text you last night and ask you, I assume your two sons are in mourning based upon the Supreme Judicial Court decision on the MBTA Communities Act. Is that fairly accurate?
I missed dinner last night, so we'll bring it up tonight. I will tell them they have lost.
Okay, so here's the deal. Everybody knows this. We've discussed this a million times. MBTA Communities Act, signed by Charlie Baker, embraced big time by Andrea Campbell and Maura Healey, basically says, now the short version, you are required in all of the 177 communities that have a significant T operation there to do zoning that is denser, that would allow for more housing and hopefully more affordable housing. Shirley wrote a lot of columns about it and ultimately voted in favor. And Milton, which originally had said yes and then said no, reversed itself, sued the Attorney General saying the whole thing is unconstitutional. She doesn't have this power. And the SJC said, well, you have to re-promulgate the regulations, which Healey says she's going to do in a nanosecond.
Yeah.
Essentially, the Attorney General absolutely had power to force a compliance. This is a pretty big deal on the housing front, is it not, Shirley?
It is, and because everything has been everybody's been waiting for this decision.
Yeah.
Because there's so many more communities that have to vote or approve these new regulations. And so, the reason why Jim brings up my son.
Oh, I forgot to explain. Go ahead.
Because, Milton, there was the town meeting passed it. There was a referendum. So, we had signs, all over a town. Yes, vote yes, to support the MP, to comply with the MBTA Communities Act, or vote no to turn down. And Milton voted no. And I asked my sons, how would you vote? Because
who are
they
too young to vote, by the way. We should be
who are
clear.
too young to vote. They're 12 and 14 now, and so I was like, how would you vote? Seeing all these signs, and of course they talked about it at school. And my 12-year-old says, of course I would vote no. I want to keep Milton rich. And I was like, what? And the younger son and the older son says, of course I would vote no, because it's going to affect my property value. More housing means. That means that the house we live in now, that's my inheritance.
Oh my God.
If we vote yes, there'll be more housing, and my this property value will go down. I was thinking,
oh my God.
My God.
Wow, future capitalists of America.
There are two kids now at the public library in Milton researching whether or not the SJC's decision can be appealed to the Supreme Court. We're talking
exactly. That's right. I'll ask them.
By the way, but it's really important because one of the questions we left unresolved yesterday was a great decision if you believe in the Communities Act and more affordable housing, which hopefully most of you do. However, this thing that the regulations were inappropriate. My understanding is Healey has said in the last 24 hours, we're going to do this almost overnight, and they're going to be implemented based upon whatever the emergency standards are. So they'll be in place almost immediately. So the delay that I think some of us worried about based on the SJC decision is going to be very short-lived.
So before I got on air, I was in the town of Needham. And do you know why I was in Needham?
Yeah, they objected to it too, right?
Yes, and their referendum is Tuesday.
Oh, really?
And so their town meeting in the fall, they passed a very ambitious rezoning plan, and so a group of residents objected, and so they took a page from Milton, and now it's on the ballot questions. I was driving around, you see the yes signs, you see the no signs, and so a lot of us are wondering, would the vote still take place? And it is indeed still taking place. And when I was at town hall, people were just early voting. And
Can
so,
I think I asked you this question. I know I've asked Andrea Campbell this question, and maybe Governor Healey. This law is mandatory. The compliance is mandatory. The highest court in the state said compliance is mandatory. The question no one has been able to answer for me, including the Attorney General, who's with us Tuesday, if a law is mandatory, why do the people of 177 communities get to vote on whether or not they want to comply with a mandatory law? Mandatory means mandatory. I mean,
I think I did. I think I.
What is the answer?
It doesn't. There are certain towns, including Milton, right, where you can challenge you can put it on the ballot.
But if you vote against it and the attorney general then sues you for enforcement, as she did, the court said she's entitled to do that. So essentially, it's a Pyrrhic, well, it's not even that. It's an empty act to vote no, because you're going to be forced to the yes position because it's a state mandate.
Right. So that's why I'm very curious what's going to happen on Tuesday, if people are going to still vote. I mean, I interviewed someone told me who's a supporter there said that. I said, well, what's going to happen Tuesday? It's like, I don't know, because the no side is very dug in. They're not going to think about the SJC ruling. They're still going to be voting no.
Well, can I tell you, I never speak for anybody except myself. Maybe you occasionally, but not that often. So Andrea Campbell's going to be with us on Tuesday, the day of the vote.
She is.
When Marjorie or I say to her, what are you going to do if Needham votes no? She's going to say three things. One, I hope they vote yes. I'm confident they will. Two, if they vote no, and I hope they don't, we'll work with them and try to get them to yes. And if you can't get them to yes, Attorney General, what will you do? I'll do what my responsibility is, sue to get enforcement. I mean, so, you can vote any way you want. This is a law that the SJC has said is mandated. We're talking to Shirley Leung, right in front of all those Boston Globe signs. At the,
That's right. I love the background. It's great. So lots of people have heard about White Stadium. It's a mess, and Michelle Wu, the mayor of Boston, has been very keen on fixing it up to the tune of, it's increased now up to $91 million of city money, but it's also going to be divided the cost with a women's soccer team. You talked about in your column that she's put on kind of the final push. So what'd you mean?
Well, the new women's soccer team, their inaugural season is March 2026. I mean, that is just around the corner. And so they haven't even demolished White Stadium yet. I mean, they just signed the lease, and their opponents, they're people in the neighborhood, also the Emerald Park Conservancy. They have sued
Emerald Necklace Conservancy.
Emerald Necklace. Emerald Necklace Conservancy, they've sued to stop the project. So there's a lot in the air. And so, and I just wrote a piece about how, she's facing a lot of opposition. What Mayor Wu needs is a little more time, a little more breathing room to get through the politics, because the crushing deadline is this inaugural season, starting in almost a year, right? Practically a year, because the season starts March 2026, right? But then you got to practice. So really you're talking, maybe it's February, I don't know. So anyways, so it's not a lot of time for her. And I just wish the team would say right now, we're gonna play in another stadium for a year or two while the city works through the politics and put on a more normal construction timeline to finish to demolish White Stadium and put a new stadium there. Because as we all know, if you have such a strict deadline, the costs are only going to go up, right? for if you have to meet a certain deadline to build something as big as a stadium.
Before Mayor Wu was with us, and she made that infamous comment, we're going to pay for our half of the stadium no matter what it costs, because when we asked the question, we said it's sort of analogous to in my opinion, why Boston 2024 and the Olympics fell apart, because John Fish, who was running it from Suffolk Construction, who I think is a very decent guy, couldn't answer the question. Taxpayers are going to end up with the tab here. She ultimately walked that back, an expression I hate, but she did walk that back. So there's a political equation there, because this thing, we're going to know by Election Day this year whether or not they are going to meet these deadlines, and if not, what's going to happen. And another election issue you wrote about today, this yet another home rule petition that the arrogant people on Beacon Hill decided they know more about Boston than the mayor and the city council did, and basically decided not to give Boston what its leaders asked for, which is the ability to adjust the property tax rates for commercial and residential to cushion the increase for residential. You argue that she may win this battle politically, even though she didn't win it fiscally.
Yes. Well, because so what's happening right now is that Boston homeowners, just in the last week, they've got their third quarter tax bills. And this is where it has the new the kind of the new rate, the new increase. And the city mayor Wu wanted a proposal where she could adjust the tax formula so that residents would get a smaller, residents wouldn't get as big of a hit, right? And she lost that battle, and a lot of, I think the residents were facing about a 10% increase in their taxes, and a lot of people are opening up their mail to sticker shock because they're saying it's not 10%, it's 17%, it's 20%, it's 25%. But when you read kind of Facebook and you read some of the social media, people followed it very closely, and a lot of people are saying, sorry, my dog's barking.
That's
Oh,
okay.
it's okay.
It's all right.
Her dog obviously works at the Boston Globe because there's a lot of Boston Globe there stuff there.
So, but anyways, so a lot of them understand that Nick Collins, the state senator from South Boston, and the Senate, they blocked it, and so she tried to do the right thing, and the politics got in the way, and so a lot of people, I think people will get that, and no, and so I think it'll be up to her to kind of make that case that she tried to do the right thing. She of course she could have been a little more savvier getting her way on Beacon Hill. I mean, she hasn't really done. She's fairly new, first-term mayor, but I'm hoping that I'm thinking she'll prevail in the court of public opinion on this.
By the way, Art from West Bridgewater, is a long-term listener, says Milton didn't vote not to comply. They rejected the plan the town meeting approved, not the same thing. That's accurate. But by rejecting the plan, and you're right, Art, by rejecting the plan that the town meeting approved, they're in non-compliance with the law. So we're both saying the same thing coming from different directions, but you are technically accurate, and thank you for the correction. So we're going to have your two sons on next week.
We are.
So we hear the other side of this.
They were in Needham,
Shirley,
I understand. They were at the Starbucks in Needham collecting signatures in the cold.
Probably.
By the way, you are a
Sounds
hell
like
of a
them.
mother. I mean it, by the way. The fact that you have a relationship like this with your kids where you can tell those stories, I'm serious.
Well, the fact
is
that they are
fabulous.
aware of this kind of stuff, I mean,
That's great.
property
That's really
values, I
great.
mean, I'm very impressed.
Yes, they. I don't know where they. Can I tell you one more story?
Yes, we love your kids' stories.
I remember one time he was at, this was like last year before, and I guess we must talk a lot about interest rates at home and mortgage rates. And so at the dinner table, so he asked his, he's at summer camp basketball, and he asked one of the high school counselors, do you know what the interest rate is on your mortgage? And the kid is like, what are you talking about? I was like, oh my God, we must talk a lot about the interest rates on our mortgages at the dinner table.
By the way, this is the same mother who admitted on the radio when one of her sons was in the basketball playoffs that she really hoped they lost soon because she was sick of going to the games. This is one hell of a woman, Shirley Leung. Shirley, we love talking to you. The background is perfect.
Shirley.
We'll talk to you soon. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks for having me. Bye.
Bye-bye. We've been speaking with Boston
That's
Globe
great.
business columnist Shirley Leung, who also hosts the podcast Say More with
great.
Shirley
It's
Leung.
really good.
New episodes drop every Thursday. Okay, coming up next, a vulturous husband gives his wife
This is a good
a
one.
2-day grace period before scarfing down her leftovers, which she puts in the refrigerator to eat herself. We'll ask you, how long should a decent person need to wait before eating food that is not theirs, or is eating someone else's leftovers without permission automatically a-hole behavior? It is, after all, Am I the A-Hole Day here on Boston Public Radio. We'll ask you after a quick break. You're listening to Boston Public Radio 89.7. We are streaming at youtube.com/GBH News.
It has not been a quiet 4 years for Bill Burns as director of the CIA.
I've taken 84 trips overseas during that time, covered more than 1 million miles, and it's just deepened the pride that I have in the work of this agency.
I'm Mary Louise Kelly. I sit down with Burns on his way out to ask about Russia, Iran, ISIS, and more. That story on All Things Considered from NPR News.
Today at 4, here on GBH News 89.7.
Our programs are made possible thanks to you. And Safety Insurance, offering a variety of home insurance products to cover your home's increased value. You can ask an independent agent about safety insurance. Safety Insurance. We'll help you manage life's storms. And the Peabody Essex Museum, presenting Saints, Sinners, Lovers, and Fools, 300 years of Flemish masterworks. On view this winter. For tickets, you can visit pem.org.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy and Marge Regan. Streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. We're back at the library tomorrow. Governor Patrick's going to zoom in during our discussion with the guy who's head of Embrace Boston, Amari Paris Jeffries, about the MLK Award ceremony. They're having a week from Sunday, live Celtic music. Callie Crossley, Sue O'Connell, and Marjorie tells me there's no tickets or RSVP required. We have a quiz before we start this segment. You can text in the answer. I'm going to hold up something. Can you see this here?
Oh,
we would
yes.
Don't say.
I won't say what it
We
is.
want listeners who are watching the streaming to guess what I am holding in my hand right here. I'm not going to show it again. Right here. Text in 877-301-8970. So the question we're ending today's show with is there such a thing as a reasonable window of time you have to eat your own leftovers before they become fair game for anybody else to eat? When, if ever, is it okay for your partner, kids, whatever, to go all in on that takeout lo mein, let's say, you didn't finish a few days ago? That's the crux of an argument brought to Reddit's Am I the A-hole, which we're bringing to you. 877-301-8970. Call or text. It really is that simple. A husband has put in place a loose 2-day rule on his wife's leftovers, and he's told her that this is the rule. 2 days, and it's fair game. She has a habit of taking food home and letting it grow moldy in the refrigerator. Her husband, not wanting to see a good meal wasted, I can relate to that, will occasionally eat the food when it's clear his wife has little to zero interest in finishing her meal. Only every time, how predictable is this? Every time he eats her leftovers, she gets upset and says she was just about to finish them. Total BS. You tell us, is the husband an a-hole for eating his wife's old food within the deadline that he established, even when it's fairly apparent she's not going to actually ever eat it? Or is the wife an a-hole for not being more honest about the fact that she wasn't going to eat that 2 or 3 day old stuff and allow her husband to ensure that food does not go to waste? The number is 877-301-8970. This is one of the easiest ones ever. What is your position?
Well, I'm with the anonymous texter who
What's
says
that?
the husband's name must be Jim Browdy. That's how he rolls.
No, actually, it's not true. I do not have a 2-day rule. I have a 2-hour rule.
Oh, okay, 2-hour rule.
By the way, if something, in all fairness, he did put his wife on notice.
He did.
He didn't get her agreement. I have to admit that. He put her on notice. He said, you have 2 days to eat your own food. And after the 2 days, in light of the fact that you never eat your leftovers and they're going to get moldy, I am going to eat them rather than I'm going to waste. It is totally clear. I hate to say this because I'm sure she's a fine person, but she is the a-hole here for not just accepting reality and accepting the fact a lot of food is wasted in this world, and her husband is willing to address that after a 2-day waiting period.
Well, 2 things.
Please.
One, I can't believe that the husband wrote to Reddit about this dilemma.
Oh, I
'cause
can.
This is a small thing, most of us would say. And
Not
if
for
it
me.
bothers her that much that he eats her food, eat something else.
It's the most ridiculous position I've ever heard. Let me ask you something.
What?
If food's going to go to waste, and somebody who lives in the house would enjoy that food and prevent it from going to waste, your position is it's better as a matter of principle to have the food wasted, go moldy, throw it out, correct?
My position is if the husband wants it that much and it's on the verge of getting moldy, which I find hard to believe that it's really moldy, he just say, sweetie, you still have the leftovers in here. It's been 2.5 days.
He gave her 2 days notice. There's
That's
a rule in effect
But then
in the house. There is a 2-day notice rule.
He just sneaks in and takes it.
No, he
I think he
doesn't.
needs to ask her.
No, he sets a timer when the 2 days runs, when 48 hours runs from the time the stuff was in there, he eats that stuff. Now, Marianne Wareham says no time limit. It is not yours. Always ask
That's
first.
right.
That is
Mary, I'm with you.
ridiculous.
She should have asked for. Apparently, Jim has eaten mountains full of leftover food.
I do, because I care about these kind of things. 877-301-8970. It's a pretty clear issue. Once again, Marjorie, you notice how slippery Marjorie can be, taking no position on this issue, because The fair
Okay.
answer is if you have a couple of days to eat
Okay.
the food and you choose not to.
I'll say the husband is the a-hole. Okay, you happy?
And why is that? I'm not happy at all. No, why is he the
Because
a-hole?
obviously this is such a big deal to her. I mean, like I said, it seems like kind of a petty thing. But if this is such a big deal to her, you want to build up that marital capital and you don't want to tick off your wife by eating her leftovers.
Well, maybe you don't want to tick off your husband by creating this tension around something that really doesn't matter at all because you're never going to eat the food. All this is about is she's offended that he's taken food that she didn't eat when they were at the restaurant. It's
Maybe she
ridiculous.
just shouldn't ask for a doggy bag. You know, that's what you
Wow,
call it
that's
when-
incredibly
Yeah, how about
ingenious.
that? How about that?
877-301-8970. Who is the a-hole?
Here's
We'd like
David
to
from
know.
Weymouth.
What's
If she
he
didn't
say?
want him to eat her leftovers, she should have fed him again. Sounds like he's been starving for 2 days.
Exactly. I was going to get to that in a few minutes. That is
Little
totally
sexist there.
That is
I think he
totally
could
correct.
feed himself.
Well, in that particular household, I think she does provide the nutrition for the people, the family.
And Dean Ashland says, since I have a habit of putting leftovers in Tupperware and forgetting about it, I now have an if not eaten by me, it's yours rule. So there you go. Oh, somebody guess what you have in your hand, Jim. Hold it up again.
Okay, I'm going to hold it up right here. Can
Yep.
we have the camera on
A
me, please?
texter
What is that
says,
thing, please?
At 1:33,
Yeah.
salami.
It is not only salami, and the answer is ding, ding, ding. You're correct. As regular listeners know, Marjorie, every birthday, Christmas, etc., gets me something of the month.
That's right.
Bacon, salami, sausage. I received yesterday in the mail here at the station chorizo rioja, Marjorie. You know
So
what
would
that
that be
means?
charisse of the month?
Well, it's a form of sausage, as they say.
Okay. Oh, then Edward from Milton is right because he guessed sausage of the month. I thought it was salami, but
No,
apparently
is that
it's
well?
sausage
Actually, maybe
of
it
the
is
month.
a salami.
And I would like to say that after Jim Braddock gave me 4 years in a row slow cookers, none of which I was interested in,
Yeah.
this year he gave me a Christmas
That's
ornament
what you said about
of a slow cooker. I thought
Yeah,
that
it wasn't
was a
even my
riot.
idea, by the way. It was one of our listeners, Amina,
It was
who was
a very
fabulous.
clever idea.
Now, let me just show, if I can. I know it's not our topic. Here's just a little tip. Can we get this again? Here's a little tip of the
There it
top
is.
there.
Yep.
Chorizo, you see that, baby? Chorizo Rioja right there in the kind of thing. I'll be eating it in the car on the way home. Matt in Worcester, who is the a-hole? The wife who is up in arms because her husband ate food that she was never going to eat anyway, or the husband who ate his wife's food after 2 days without permission? Matt-
Can you hear me all right?
Oh, we can. Yes, go right ahead.
Okay, yeah, I'm actually in Leicester, right next door to Worcester. But
Oh, that's
still the
close
same.
enough. Yeah,
Close
that's good.
enough.
Yeah.
Yep. No, I think he's right putting a time limit on it.
Yeah.
I think he's actually goes out a little long. If we do something on a Saturday and we got leftovers that we bring home,
Yeah.
I want to sit in the fridge all through Sunday. She's going to say she's going to have a Sunday for lunch, Sunday for supper,
Yeah.
take it to lunch work on Monday. If
Yeah.
it's still there Monday, it's fair game.
I love that. So you would shorten the 48-hour time limit because it's shorter in your house and it works pretty well.
Correct.
Is your wife okay with this, Matt, or is this like a unilateral kind of thing?
It goes up and down.
Okay. You're an honest man, Matt.
Depends what-
I like your style. Thank you very much for being the first call on this Am I the A-hole
Here's a
day.
couple of texts. If I absolutely don't want anyone to eat my leftovers, I put a sticky note, don't eat.
Exactly.
Oftentimes, I look forward to my leftovers. John from Nantucket tells his wife that food isn't going to go to waste, it's going to go to his waste.
Oh, I like that.
Isn't that cute?
That is actually very cute. Thank you very much.
Let's go to Retha in the car. Hi, thank
Hey
you
there.
for calling.
Welcome.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Hi. So, from where I come from, food doesn't belong to anyone.
I love this.
It's food. It's communal, and it should be shared. So it's not my food, your food. It's food in the fridge, and whoever is hungry should eat it. And, I mean, hello, have you seen Gaza?
Hello.
Enough people are hungry right now. Let's not waste food.
Retha, where are you from, if I may ask?
Ethnically, I'm from India.
Oh,
And that's the
It's so
tradition.
funny, Retha, because we just got a text from someone, Maya from Boston. She said she went to boarding schools in India where food was not allowed in the dorms, but you brought food in the dorm, or that care package that you get from mom with stale but highly valued chocolates or cookies was fair game for all the kids.
I
so
love
there
that.
you go.
Hey, Retha, that was a fabulous call. We're glad you made it. Call us again. Appreciate it. What do you think of that?
I think that that's very humanitarian. Caring
That's sort
for
of a
your,
beautiful thing.
Yes, it is a beautiful.
And if you don't want to
do
do the humanitarian thing that Retha talked about, then you should hide the food. I'm serious that you brought home that you don't want to be communal.
People do that. They put things in the way back of the refrigerator. You know, somebody did say, we talked about fridgescaping yesterday, where people arrange their refrigerators with beautiful framed pictures and flowers. And someone just texted that they thought that the leftovers were ruining their fridgescaping. That's why they were forced to eat them.
Listen to this Susan from Merrimack, who is really calling you out, if I may say. Come on, Marjorie, it starts. Thrown out food is a major piece of one's carbon footprint. The husband is performing a public service. It'd be nice of him to ask permission, but it is not mandatory. That is Susan in Merrimack.
That's true.
Susan, that was brilliant.
But
Thank you.
I'm now become, a holier than thou on my composting front. That's why you don't feel so guilty about throwing out food, because you are composting it and they come to pick it up.
Which is
and they're
better,
little-
to compost it or to consume it? Which is better? Consuming it, obviously, is the answer. I mean, isn't that obvious? It's ridiculous.
Well, yeah, but if you're guilty about throwing out food, and I am guilty about that and lots of other things, if you compost it, you don't feel quite so bad.
Yes. You know what I do in the car, by the way, when no one's looking, because you're supposed to use a knife to do this. I take a bite out of the chorizo Rioja sausage as I'm driving to my next stop.
I think the way you hold that chorizo so lovingly, is it chorizo or chorizo?
No, it's chorizo. This is chorizo.
Spanish and chorizo is Portuguese.
Well, this is chorizo Rioja.
Chorizo, okay.
Is what it is.
You should see Jim.
Looks
He's
lovely.
in love with his chorizo.
No, I
Katie
am.
from Situate, thank you for calling.
Hi, Katie. Hello there.
It's your favorite aggressive cleaner. You guys
Oh,
are
hey,
cracking
Katie.
me up.
Great to talk to you. What's up?
Marjorie, you're from Fall River. You should know exactly how to pronounce Charisse.
Charisse, right? That's what we call it in the river. We call it
You're a
Charisse.
Fall River girl.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is perfect after yesterday's cleaning of the fridge excitement. And I loved the woman 2 callers ago that was like, food should not be wasted and food should be shared.
Retha, she was great.
So if this couple has talked about it, like I don't think she's an a-hole, but like she shouldn't get upset about it.
Exactly. It's a little petty.
That is perfect, by the way. I mean, you were accusing the husband of being petty. The person who's petty is the wife. What's the big deal? Katie, excellent call. Thank you very much.
Well, that is sort of the question here. Is this big of a deal that you would take the time to compose your letter, to read it and listen to all the responses because you want to eat your wife's leftovers and she doesn't want you to do it?
Well, let me just tell you what was done.
His
to
marriage
this
could
guy-
be in trouble,
What
Jim.
was done to this guy is unconscionable. I'm serious. It is so over the line what the wife did. Who wrote this note? Is Jamie, it appears. What's happened to this show in 2025? Jamie writes, usually all the texters are against Jim and, quote, hate to disagree with Marjorie. Today, everyone's on Jim's side. We are in a dark
It's true.
place.
I've gotten
Jamie
a lot of people
says.
calling me the a-hole today, Jim.
Wow, that is
Usually
really
they call you the
unkind.
a-hole,
They
but a lot of
do.
people are calling
That's
me
when
the
you're
a-hole
happier.
today. That's right.
877-301-8970. What do you didn't comment on Retha's thought. What about the notion you bring food into a house or a dorm or whatever? The beautiful, the humanitarian thing to do is it's everybody's food.
Okay, so suppose you had a nice fillet that you brought home from some wonderful restaurant. You only ate half of it at the restaurant, which is hard to believe. You only
Okay.
ate half of it. But if you did, how would you feel about your wife
Well, I think you
or
answered
your
the
children?
you answered the question. The next leftover I have will be the first leftover I have ever had. By the way, not only when I go out to eat, do I eat everything that I ordered, I eat everything that everybody ordered.
Yeah, my son is like that. I was out to dinner with him a couple of weeks ago, and I ate probably half of because it was a huge portion, half of my thing, and then I just slide the plate over to him, and he polishes everything.
You went to
else
Chef
off.
Dave's for the first time, right?
I
How great is
did.
that?
It was spectacular.
One of the Welch brothers, OG in Harvard Square and Chef Dave's in Chestnut Hill. Two
Wagyu
fabulous places.
cheeseburgers.
Wagyu.
Wagyu. Whoops.
Thank you.
Okay, that's Japanese.
That's the finest beef.
Yeah. Well, I had
Would you come into some money or something?
the Wagyu cheeseburger.
You know what the kind of burger I had the other day?
What?
A chorizo Rioja burger. Or I'm having it tonight. Nancy in Rhode Island, who is the a-hole? Welcome to the show. Hi.
Hi. Thanks for taking my call.
Well, thank you.
I think the a-hole actually, sorry, Marjorie, is
It's okay.
the wife. She seems kind of passive-aggressive to me.
Exactly.
If she really wanted the food, she should label it with her name or with a "Don't eat this, it's mine" label. And the husband given the 2 days warning seems more than enough to me.
You know, you should be a judge, Nancy. That was brilliant. She should label the put her name on it, as Nancy said, and say, do not eat. And if she doesn't do those two things, it's fair game, correct?
Yes, that's what we do in my house, and we all know, don't eat the food that's labeled.
Now, Nancy, how often does anybody in your house actually label their food?
Well, in the
and saying,
office,
do not
people
eat?
are always labeling their food, and I happen to know some people that have ignored those labels.
Okay, good. So I know who you're talking, but you're in. Well, whatever. Nancy, how often does somebody label their food in the way you described?
We do it right in the restaurant. As we get our to-go boxes, I pull out the pen and we label our boxes so that
I love
have
it.
them
Nancy,
labeled before they go in the fridge.
You are fabulous. Your whole family is fabulous. That is great. I didn't expect. That is great. Nancy, thank you for your call. How beautiful and organized is that, by the way?
That is very impressive. Listen to this one. I have the midnight snack rule. If it's midnight, I can eat whatever I want that's in the fridge. That's a good one.
Well, can we talk about the reverse of this, by the way? Mm-hmm. One of the saddest things, one of the truly sad moments I've experienced is when I have been told, please don't eat that particular thing. And you look at it, it's looking back at you. And you know it's exactly what you want.
It's tough.
And it's not something your kid or your spouse really wants. And you just have to just say no. I mean, it is really...
It's painful,
it's
Jim.
It's
one of the great
really
tragedies
painful.
Of life.
Well, in any case. And no, it is. It is. Let's go to Tiffany in West Roxbury. Welcome to the show, Tiffany. Good to have you.
Hi, Jim and Marjorie.
Hi.
Long-time listener, first-time caller.
I love that. Thank you so much.
So I am on Team Marjorie for this one.
Oh, thank you, Tiffany. I'm getting pummeled.
Yes.
Why is that?
So I'm a huge proponent of eating all of the leftovers. I hate food waste. However, I don't like to eat the same thing 2 days in a row. So if I have my dinner leftovers from Saturday, I'm probably going to eat that on Monday, not Sunday, because I like variety. So for me, that 48 rule doesn't apply very well. Yeah.
That's a good
Wait
one.
a second, Tiffany.
That's a good one.
What if it was a 50-hour rule instead of a 48-hour rule? Would you be okay with that?
Probably not.
I thought that's probably the case. Tiffany, thank you for the call.
So
go ahead.
Oh yeah, you're welcome.
No, you know.
No, I was going to say it's so disappointing. I live alone now, but when I lived with my partner, you'd be looking forward to coming home and having those leftovers for lunch or dinner. And then literally, what somebody else would say, you walk in and they're like, oh, I just ate it. You're kidding.
Well, can I tell you something? I'm going to have to agree with you on that one thing there. That is, I talked about how painful it is when a piece of food is staring at you and you can't eat it. The only thing that's worse, I know, in the very rare circumstance where someone has eaten something of mine and you're really looking forward to it, it is a painful experience. Tiffany, thank you much for the call.
To this text from Donna on the road.
Yeah.
So add to the list of what makes for happy marriage separate bathrooms, separate bedrooms, and now separate refrigerators with locks.
Yeah, I've had that discussion in my house. Jeremy in Somerville says, got into a huge, capital letters, huge fight with my partner over this situation, but with snacks. I believe there is a statute of limitation on snacks, after which they become communal property. This drives me out of my mind. My partner will buy a pack of Oreos and eat one a day, meaning the pack will tempt me for weeks. I believe in consuming junk food as fast as possible so it no longer torments me. Now, do you disagree with that? If you live with somebody who's eating one Oreo a day and the thing is staring at you for a month or however many Oreos, that's a problem, would you not say?
Well, I have a massive amount of Lindt chocolate balls, probably 50 at any one time.
Yeah.
And I usually eat one a day or two a day.
And for a month?
Well, until they're gone.
Do you think anybody bought more Lindt chocolate balls than you and me at the Lindt store? By the way, there's a in the Lennox Hotel,
I had these massive
right across from our studio.
Sacks full of Lindt balls.
You know why? Because the price, as we learned, 150 were a certain price, but for a week there, we got right in.
That's right.
You got 50% more. You get an extra 75.
And I had my special diamond card membership.
So Margie and I brought a
little
cot in, and we decided to just stay there through the whole sale. How good are they?
Yeah, but
why don't you talk
some
about
people,
when they're fresh?
But some people do get annoyed by that. My sister gets annoyed by that when she comes out to visit. She finds that very annoying. These hundreds of Lindt balls staring her in the face.
By the way, Janet in Cambridge makes a wonderful point. You are ignoring the fact the woman apparently never eats her leftovers. That is the most important point here.
That is a good point.
This is a woman, and by the way, she didn't write a response saying it was untrue. He says, even though she complains about after the 48 hours runs and he's eaten her thing, that she almost never eats. So she's complaining just to complain. Would you not agree with that?
Well, that's what I'm saying. The whole situation seems a little bit, is this really rise to the level of this amount of concern?
Listen to this one. Read that anonymous text on the
Wife
screen.
isn't just passive aggressive. She's a bully. Like she's taunting him.
Exactly.
It's mine, but I don't want it.
Exactly
But I
that
also
line.
don't want you to have it.
Let me repeat
That's right.
that.
I think it's time to call a divorce lawyer.
It's mine, but I don't want it, but I also don't want you to have it. That is brilliant, that analysis from person anonymous. James in Bridgewater, welcome to the show. Hi.
Hi, my name is James. Yes, I have a current situation that's going on in my house right now.
What's that?
I usually give a 24-hour rule.
Yes.
And my wife is constantly on me about eating her leftovers, so I gave a 24-hour rule. I have 3 daughters, and they're constantly bleeding stuff overnight, and a couple of days, and stuff goes bad.
I see.
So that's why I came up with the rule.
You did.
So I decided if you don't label it, it's up for grabs.
Wow.
So if you don't label it, you're the a-hole, and if you eat it before 24 hours, you're the a-hole.
Wow, you have really
Wow.
thought this through, James, brilliantly, actually.
He's written a plan of attack.
That was a fabulous analysis. Thank you for sharing. I have to say, there have been a lot of fabulous calls. Retha talking about communal stuff is beautiful. And how about that woman a minute ago whose whole family labels their leftovers at the restaurant table? She hands out markers and they label their crap before they go home.
Carries with me. If the wife gets that angry about it, save herself the aggravation or pick a fight and eat it. It seems like there are issues not too far below the surface here.
Wow. That's pretty deep, actually,
think so.
isn't it? It's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mimi, you're in Harwich. You're on Boston Public Radio. Thank you for calling in. Hi.
Hi. So I have a friend growing up that used to come to our house. No one was home.
Yeah.
And the friend would go into our refrigerator and eat any leftovers that he found because he insisted that my father's cooking was better than his mother's.
Let me tell you, I'm in love with that person. Whoever it is, it's a beautiful story. How did your family feel about that?
They hated it. They went crazy because they would come home thinking, we're going to have chicken marsala, and it's all gone. Or we're going to have eggplant parmesan. It was all gone. And he would sit proudly at the table, full as could be, saying, yeah, well, sorry. And it wasn't a hunger thing. He was from a very wealthy family. He just didn't like Jewish food.
Well, that's a pretty good story there. Mimi, thanks for sharing that. We appreciate it.
You know, one of the things I really look forward to if it's leftovers, pizza. I love pizza. If the pizza is eaten, I get very upset about
You know what?
that.
I had dinner the other night with friends, and you know what they told me they did with pizza when
What?
they ordered too much?
What?
They froze it. I've never heard of that in my life.
Really?
You freeze pizza?
It doesn't last that long. I really love pizza. There's a couple of pizzas.
So you never have enough left over to put it in the freezer?
Oh, I have enough left over to put it in the freezer, but I'll usually eat it the next day. If you have 2 or 3 pieces left over, I'll put it in the microwave. Now, some people say
nice
it makes it too
story.
smushy if you put it in the
Oh, it
microwave.
makes it soft and horrible.
But I like it that way.
You like the crust softened?
I like the whole thing kind of.
And how would you feel if someone like me snuck
Pizza,
into your
I'd be-
house in
I
the
might
middle
be
of the
a little
night
upset.
and took all your remaining pizza?
You're anticipating the pizza. Listen to this one, though. As someone who regularly and happily eats my leftovers several days after I bought them home, I side with the wife. I'm all about solutions, so I bought a locked Tupperware container off eBay that only I have the key to just for this situation. That's Sarah from Waltham.
Tupperware has a lock?
Apparently so.
That you can buy. Now, we cannot, every time Jared comes in the studio, we ask him, what do you think about the topic we're discussing? You know why we can't ask him his opinion on this? If your refrigerator only has week-old hummus in it, which we learned yesterday, and a beer, there's not much for anybody to come in and
anything
take.
about beer.
Well, whatever, a hummus. So if you were in a situation where you actually had a full refrigerator and a partner, a friend, or whatever took it after a fair notice, basically saying in 48 hours I'm going to eat your food if you don't eat it. How would you feel about that, Jared Bowen?
After 48 hours, I think that's fine. But nobody has mentioned the fact, can't you just text the partner or the family member or the friend and say, do you mind if I eat this?
Exactly.
When you're really
and if they don't
hungry,
get back
there's
to
no
you.
time for texting. It's really...
Or in the middle of the night when you're doing the
That's another
midnight
good point.
fridge rage.
Yeah.
No, I think after 48 hours. But if you were with me, you would know that if it's pasta or pizza, you can't eat it. Because those are the only two leftovers I'll eat.
Pizza.
How much is
I'm
great
with you.
pasta for breakfast?
Oh,
Is that
so
a
good.
fabulous
Yeah.
experience?
Now, what do you do to reheat the pasta? You put it in the microwave?
I do put it in the microwave.
Yeah, so
Pizza,
do I.
I will reheat in the oven.
Yeah, well, that's a big controversy. Should you put
It's
it in the
not a
microwave or the
controversy at
oven? I
all.
think most people do put it in the oven, but I kind of like it in the microwave.
Margie
It's
doesn't know
all
how to turn her
smushy.
oven on. That's the problem.
Uh-huh.
Well, by that
Thank you very much.
point, by that point, you're ravenous, so you have to have it microwave fast.
This is one of your better analyses.
Oh,
of things. It's
this
excellent.
texter it always freezes her pizza and puts the leftovers in the toaster oven, just like new.
Incredible.
Or you can just hide them in the freezer.
Hide them. Well, that's what you have to
Behind
do
the-
if you really
the
want something. You have to
Kettle One.
hide it. You have to hide it so no one knows it's there.
Okay, what are you doing on the show there?
We are going to be talking about the new film Maria streaming on Netflix about
Oh.
Maria Callas, but we're going to be talking about it with Jane Eaglin, the Grammy Award-winning opera singer.
Oh,
to
my
get
God.
Her take on it because she has some things to say.
That's brilliant, actually.
And then we'll talk to Julia Swanson of the Art Walk Project about the art in the tea. There's a whole fabulous program about public art down there. And then James Parker, the Atlantic writer, who has written this fabulous book, Get Me Through the Next 5 Minutes. It's a book of odes. Odes to brain farts, odes to horses farting, odes to real things like gum and naps. And he's brilliant and
Oh,
funny.
really? That sounds pretty good.
It is. It's
How you doing with this
wonderful read.
pressure of the show starts in like 2 minutes?
I'm getting all of my steps in real fast.
Okay, run down
That's right,
the
he has
hall.
to run down the
Jared
hallway.
Bowen, 2 o'clock sharp. No news at 2 o'clock. You go right to the Culture Show. Jared, good to see you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jared, and thank you all for listening to another edition of Boston Public Radio and for watching our stream. Keep up with us 24/7 by way of our podcast or check out our TikTok page at Boston Public Radio.
Do you know a minute ago, I know you're not feeling so good, and it's great. You came in, you put your head on the desk, and it was on the streaming.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. I'm just saying.
Okay.
It's a beautiful sight.
We're live at the Boston Public Library tomorrow. Live Music Fridays
You're a
with
real
Lindsay
trooper, actually.
O'Donovan.
She is.
She is a wonderful Celtic musician, and of course, she was married for many years to our former colleague Brian O'Donovan, another genius
wait.
at Celtic music.
Yep.
That's going to be great. GBH's Callie Crossley, media maven Sue O'Connell, Embrace Boston CEO Imari Paris, Jeffries with former Governor Deval Patrick. They're about to receive, Patrick is about to receive an honor at this year's Embrace Honors Martin Luther King Gala.
He's zooming in, by the way.